Welcome back, and tonight we have Austin here. Me and Austin are going to be doing college football tier list review for what we did before the 2023 college football season started. As you guys might remember, we did a tier list ranking, and we've got it on screen. We're going to go through what we did in the preseason, ranking these teams to see where we went right and where we went wrong. And we're going to re-rank the teams based on actually what they did. It should be a lot of fun. Can't wait to get into it. But what are your first thoughts, Austin, about what we're going to be getting into tonight?
Oh, you know, it's going to be a fun live stream. I'm looking forward to this, especially revisiting some of our mistakes that we made and going back and fixing them, and some of our things that we did get right. Because you do get things right and you do get things wrong, and as you can see by what Jeffrey has pulled up right in front of us, though, we did make some big mistakes in the preseason, but that's what the preseason's for. You learn and you live. And we're here to fix it now. We're here to get it right for you all. I'm looking forward to this, Jeffrey, and it'll be a fun memory stroll down memory lane.
Oh, it's going to be fun for sure. Will is in the chat. Hey, appreciate you being here, Will. We got CarCast 49ers Top Podcast. Yo, he says, appreciate you being here. And RC as well. What's good? Only Talk Sports. Have a great show. I'll be in and out of the chat. Probably salute. Appreciate everybody for being here for tonight's show. But definitely, as you can see, college football, playoff contenders. Most of these we got about right. You can't really complain too much. Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State, Alabama. They were in the conversation, especially Alabama and Michigan. They made the playoff, but Georgia and Ohio State, they were close. They were right there, but then you've got Clemson and Penn State. Penn State wasn't too bad. They were close, but Clemson ended up not doing that well compared to preseason expectation. What are your thoughts on our CFP contenders rankings, Austin? I think you're muted.
Love the support for context. Sorry about that. Muted microphone. Anywho, this is live, people. Anyway, so anywho, we're doing, for those of you who are there the first time, understand what this concept is. But if you're new and you've never seen something like this, just to explain it real fast, we did a tier list putting where we thought every team was. And as Jeffrey pointed out, CFP contenders, they're one of our biggest ones. And getting into that, Georgia, Michigan, Alabama, Ohio State, Clemson, Penn State. I think out of all six of those, Jeffrey, I think we did pretty good. I would take back that Clemson one if I could, but I think it's because Clemson's been such a valuable of consistency, kind of like the New England Patriots. You're just like, the Patriots, they just don't die. They don't go away. Like Clemson will be there until the end. Penn State, we should have known not to do them, Jeffrey, because they always lose the two biggest games of their season. We should have known, but that's why we're here to fix it now. But for the most part, we got it right. I think you could have maybe added Oregon. Obviously Washington down there. We'll get to that. Get to the second tier here in a second. So there was a couple teams, and then obviously the orange and golden orange. We'll get to that in just a minute, but I think we did overall well on the first one, Jeffrey. I say we did fine, other than maybe the Clemson one.
We got Jackson here as well. So what's up? Only Talk Sports Nation, Sports Talk with Austin Nation. Appreciate that for being here, Jackson. But yeah, I would agree. You got to put Clemson there in the preseason because of what they've done for so long. And the ACC being not one of the better conferences. You just felt, despite the fact Clemson not using the portal, it is egregious how they're not using the portal, and that's why they're not as good right now. That's why they went 9-4 this season, and they've been down the last couple of years, but they have still a lot of talent. We just felt, I thought they would anyway, be in the conversation. I thought they could go 11-1 and be on the fringes of the playoffs, but it just did not occur. Yeah, Jackson's Clemson's basically Patriots of college football, like you mentioned, Austin. I don't mean that in a nice way. Well, to be fair, though, the Patriots have fallen further than Clemson right now. The Patriots are awful. At least Clemson still was 9-4. But you mentioned with Penn State as well, we had them. That was the one we debated the most putting there, because the argument was that they had a lot of talent this year and that maybe they could knock off a Michigan or Ohio State, one of the two. And they were close, to be fair. Like, both games, they tried and they were within reach of the Buckeyes and the Wolverines, but Penn State just couldn't get it done. So, I mean, I can't really say they were ever a contender, but they were a couple touchdowns away from possibly being in the conversations. But with Clemson, yeah, they were the one that definitely disappointed the most. And like Will said, Clemson lost the benefit of the doubt after this season. I agree. I think people are going to start treating them differently now. I guess, excuse, that they're still among the elite, like, because of what they've done, basing off the past, like, they're still elite. It's gone. They've had too many seasons now of not being one of the 4 best teams in college football that I think people are going to start fading on them. But I think, to your point, we did really well with the CFP contenders for the most part. Now, the New Year's 6 contenders, we got USC, LSU, Oregon, Tennessee, and Washington. In hindsight, this wasn't awful for the most part. I know it looks bad, but Washington, even though we didn't put them in CFP, they ended up being really, really good. And then you talk about Oregon. Yeah, they made the NY6, but then Tennessee and USC, not that great. LSU was all right this season, but what are your thoughts, man?
Oh, Jeffrey, remind me to never buy any of that Tennessee hype over Alabama again, because Jeffrey, I think even you would agree with me. I think we kind of got a little high on Tennessee, so to speak, because of that great season that they had, and we gave them the benefit of the doubt way too soon. And we thought, with Joe Milton and the offense that they had around Hendon Hooker, we thought, okay, Joe Milton, he may have been bad at Michigan, being nice, but maybe at Tennessee, it's a different scenery, different change. We see it all the time with quarterbacks. Maybe with Tennessee being more stable and bringing a lot of talent since they're in the SEC, they might go 10-2, possibly 11-1, and be in the NY6 because of their schedule, and plus Tennessee has beaten Bama already, so they know that they can get it done. In hindsight, we shouldn't have done that. USC, theirs was basically, we were buying the hype of Caleb Williams being everything that they said they were going to be. But then, Jeffrey, all we heard from USC fans were the defense is going to be better. Don't you worry. The defense is going to be top 50, top 50. And don't get me wrong, I love USC, and I love all the USC fans that watch our channels, both of our channels. It's great, especially our good friends over at the Voice of College Football USC channel, Tim, Tony, and Rick. Love y'all to death, but let's be real. The defense did not get no better. And it showed multiple times throughout the year, and not even Caleb Williams could pull them across the finish line. And that's saying something. Oregon, I think they lived up to their expectations as advertised. Washington, they over-delivered, in my opinion. NY6 was like, okay, that's kind of like the ceiling. Playoff, like, And then the season they had, it's like, wow, Michael Penix is the man. Who knew? Which you did, Jeffrey, because you watch a lot of Indiana football, which we'll get to them in a second. But then LSU, they were kind of interesting because they did this to us last year, if you remember, Jeffrey, real quick, where they had those 2 losses and then they beat Bama, and it's kind of like, could they sneak in? Could they possibly, if they somehow upset Georgia? We were like, LSU, they brought a lot of people back. Jane Daniels, who won the Heisman. Malik Neighbors might be a top 20 pick in the draft this year based off what he did at LSU if he decides to go. And hindsight, Jeffrey, the LSU one wasn't that terrible because they could have, if they would have beaten Bama or beaten Ole Miss, maybe they could have snuck in that conversation. But overall, this one wasn't as bad. The USC and Tennessee one, I wish we could take back.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that in all actuality, LSU and USC should have been NY6 contenders because they had the quarterbacks, right? I mean, you've got Caleb Williams, you've got Jaden Daniels, and both delivered, especially Jaden Daniels. He won the Heisman. I mean, he was fantastic, even though I do believe Penix Chet had a big argument there. He should have probably won because he won the games, but Daniels had the stats. And it does seem like the Heisman's kind of becoming a stats award. But when you have Caleb Williams and you have Jane Daniels, yes, both these teams should have been at least NY6 contenders, but the defenses for both these teams were so bad that it prevented that. So I don't really think we were really off. I just feel like, we were looking at the quarterbacks they had and the offenses, but unfortunately, the defenses were so bad they couldn't get it done. LSU ended up being pretty solid. They were close, so it wasn't a bad pick, but USC, that lost to UCLA. And then UCLA goes out there and loses to Cal the next week. Really? I mean, come on. Like, that was just an ugly look for the Trojans. Definitely they should have been better than 7-5 in the regular season. I mean, that big win over, unfortunately, sorry, Austin, but the big win over Louisville, Miller Moss in the bowl game, I mean, kind of salvaged their season a little bit, but 8-5 is not NY6 contender. So it was very disappointing for USC fans. Oregon, we got that right. Nailed it. Oregon did exactly what most people were expecting. Washington, we didn't expect them to be in CFP, but we at least were high on them, especially me, because I think a lot of people were saying top 25. I was the one, I was like, Penix. You got to go with Penix here, NY6. So at least I gave him credit there. But Tennessee, I mean, they beat Iowa in the bowl game, went 9-4, but still, we were a little off there. We should have put them in top 25 team. But it is what it is. Tennessee was not bad, but Joe Milton just could not replicate what Hendon Hooker did.
Yeah, for sure, Jeffrey. And it's going to be interesting to see if we do this again sometime next year in the preseason where we have all these teams again, see if we get caught up in the preseason hype. But speaking of preseason hype, Jeffrey, our next tier is top 25 teams. And the teams that we thought would be in the top 25 during the season, teams that we thought that would be, would get some good wins, but not quite NY6 or playoff team. And a couple of glaring omissions: Arkansas, South Carolina, Texas Tech. Those were some big ones right there that me and Jeffrey kind of bought in on the hype of, and it kind of bit us in the rear, so to speak. Wisconsin, Utah, we didn't know the status of Cam Rising at the time. If we would have known he wouldn't have been healthy, maybe we would have bumped him down just a little bit, because maybe we thought Rising could come back mid-season and that would help the Utes propel maybe to another Pac-12 championship game. Obviously Florida State making the college football playoffs. Missing the playoffs, excuse me. Too early, Florida State fans, but almost making it. We were a little down on Florida State. Texas, another one, a team that made it. We didn't see that coming. Notre Dame, sorry, Will, if you're in the chat, they kind of underperformed this year in a way, because if they wouldn't have lost to my Louisville Cardinals, we could be having a different conversation with them right now. And then the heartbreaker against Ohio State. So Notre Dame, I think we got them right, but in all actuality, if Notre Dame wins those games, they could have been in the NY6 Bowl. North Carolina, I don't know how you want to assess them. Their defense let them down towards the end of the season, cost them a spot in the ACC title game. Ole Miss, they performed way better than me and Jeffrey originally thought. We thought 9 wins was this team's ceiling, and that was it, and they ended up getting 11. All props to them, and hopefully they can keep it going. Oregon State, they were for the longest time, but now they're just falling apart worse than a bag of cereal that got opened. But then Texas Tech, a lot of people's sleeper NY6 team. We thought maybe top 25 because the Big 12 was top-heavy good. But, Jeffrey, what do you think? Do you think we did okay in this category? I think we did all right.
Well, I mean, this is such a broad category, kind of like with, the CFP and the NY6 being a lot smaller. This one has more teams in it. So you're not going to get as close to as many as right as possibly, some of these other tiers where there aren't as many teams. So I think based on all of these teams that we put in the top 25, we got more of them right than not. I mean, you look at Iowa, they were a top 25 team. They ended up being that. Kansas State was a top 25 team. Notre Dame was a top 25 team. Oklahoma was. Utah technically was. I mean, a lot of these we got right. Carolina was top 25 the entire season until the end. Oregon State was top 25 the entire season until the end. So we didn't really do that bad. I mean, the only two that were really bad was South Carolina and Arkansas, because we were believing in Beamer and Pittman that they were going to be able to turn this around. Or kind of more in South Carolina's case, keep it rolling, actually. With Arkansas, more like turning around. But with South Carolina, I mean, they were pretty solid last year. And, they had that really good bowl game against Notre Dame, but then they just collapsed this season. I mean, it started out ugly against North Carolina, and that's when North Carolina looked at their best at the beginning of the season. So we didn't do that bad. I mean, yes, Florida State, we should have had them higher, but I think we kind of thought they were going to go like 9-3 or 10-2. And, with the ACC being a bit weak, we thought maybe they would not make it, but they did really well. They found a way to go undefeated until the end. So it is what it is with that. But still, at least we put them in top 25. And then, a team like Texas, we just didn't know if they were back. We didn't know if this was the year. And it ended up being the year that they technically were back, even though they didn't end up winning the whole thing. But just making it to the college football playoff was an improvement for the Longhorns, as they have never made it. So I think overall we did pretty good. Most of these teams we got right. There was a few that weren't right, but for overall, I think we did pretty solid.
Yeah, and I will say before we move on to our back half here, so we can get to re-ranking, I will say Florida State, I think a lot of what we thought, and I think it's not out of line saying this, we kind of had that thing with Florida State, kind of like we do with Texas. Is this actually the year y'all are going to be legitimate and prove yourself as that contender? Because if you remember, Jeffrey, they've done this a couple times where we're like, ooh, they went 9-3, won 6 in a row to end the year. This is great, looking good. And then the next year they underperformed badly. And then everyone got a hype off George Travis, like, oh, he's a Heisman contender, ACC Player of the Year, which he did win, but it was like we didn't know at the time. It was like, how good is Florida State? Are they the ACC versions of Texas? People keep saying they're back, and they're not.
Miami's a better example of that.
That's fair. We'll get to Miami here in just a second, but I just want to throw that in there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Helmus Hero says, I feel like Texas Tech was a bit disappointing. Yeah, they were. Because I think, if I recall, they were like the first team in the other receiving votes at the beginning of the season. They were like the 26th ranked team. And most people thought they were going to go like 8-4. Yeah, they did a little worse. It is what it is, though. Again, for the most part, we did solid. Frank Carone, appreciate you being here, says Ohio State's really looking good for 2024. I definitely agree. They're looking really good, all the additions they've made. But, yeah, I mean, like, some of these teams, though, I mean, like, they technically were top 25. Like I said, with Carolina, Oregon State, they fell out late, in Utah as well, but they still kind of count, for the most part, as being top 25 teams. I was pretty impressed with how we did. I mean, we weren't perfect, but it's hard for anybody to be perfect. To go to the next list, though, you got the bowl teams, and we put a lot of teams here. A lot of teams in the bowl teams. From UCLA to Wake Forest. We'll start breaking this down. What are your thoughts on this tier list, Austin, right here?
So this, I think we made more of a whoopsie than we did anything. Obviously, TCU's the first one that jumps off the board. Mm-hmm. They were a team that was the national runner-up the prior year. Max Duggan, Quentin Johnson. That team was loaded with talent. A couple guys went to the NFL. And not a lot of people were like, oh, TCU, they shouldn't have this, shouldn't have that. That team was really good. Not a lot of people, if you watch the game and pay attention to the X's and O's, it's like TCU's good. Like, let's not underestimate them. And it's like, and me and Jeffrey were like, they are the national runner-up, though, but that we put some respect on their name. And in hindsight, this isn't a bad choice. It's like, it's the national runner-up. You really can't put them in almost bowl. But let's be realistic here. Illinois, another disappointing team. Boy, oh boy, Luke Altmaier for the Illinois quarterback. A lot of people had their doubts about him. And I believe, Jeffrey, I believe you were one of them. If I remember correct, I think you were one of his biggest doubters. Mm-hmm. And you're right. Minnesota, I don't know how you want to treat them because they snuck in. I mean, because with their smart.
That should not count.
Like, Minnesota got him because of their smarts. Washington State, They fumbled down the stretch of the season. We should have technically gotten that one right. But Jeffrey, it is college football, and Wake Forest. Maybe we didn't realize maybe how much Sam Hartman was valuable to that team, and we tried to take Clawson the benefit of the doubt. Pitt, that maybe this was their 1 year off. Texas A&M, they were a bowl team. Baylor, good grief. I mean, spoiler alert, they're going in the dumpster when we get there. But Auburn, Duke, Kansas, Florida. Florida was one, Jeffrey. They should have made a bowl, but they kind of choked that away. Would you agree?
Oh, yeah.
Florida should have technically counted. But go ahead.
I mean, my biggest takeaway from this is that we were very close with a lot of these. I mean, a lot of these teams went like 5-7. They were kind of like TCU, Illinois went 5-7. Like they were very close to making a bowl game. And like Hummus Hero said, you guys got Minnesota Crown a technicality. I mean, we did. I'm not really counting it though. To me, like, they're not a bowl team. The APR score getting them in at 5-7. I mean, that's just not fair. Like Rutgers as well. I mean, I know Minnesota won the bowl game, but they were playing Bowling Green, ironically, who Minnesota lost to when they were a better team a few years ago. Like that's just ironic.
Zero. It does not feel good to get that right.
Yeah, the Press Raiders fan, appreciate you being here, says this list is every single college team, all the Power 4 teams, or the Power 5. This last year, the Power 5. We're not doing the group of 5, but we didn't do in the preseason, and we're just going over and we're going to re-rank them. But appreciate you for being here. But yeah, Louisville, they should have been higher. Louisville should have been higher. I will give you credit there, Austin. They should have been higher, but I mean, they made a bowl game. So at least we said they were going to be a bowl team.
Well, if you remember, Jeffrey, and to the depressed Raiders fan, we will do the other teams like the Cincinnatis and the Houstons now that because this is a tier list that we found on the fly and that didn't have it up to date. Now we got an up to date version, so we can fix it now. But to get back to this, see, Jeffrey, the thing with Louisville is, and we had a rational conversation about this. We normally always do. The thing with Louisville is, our season was Notre Dame. If we beat Notre Dame, we have sky's the limit. We lose Notre Dame, we're in this position regardless, I think. But since we beat Notre Dame, it kind of makes it like, hey, Jeffrey, maybe put us up one more tier. Or it's kind of one of those things. It's like it's preseason. It's kind of like we expected Baylor to be better. We expected them to at least make a bowl, and they're over here not doing anything. It's like, so it's like, I understand why you're giving us credit, but it's like we didn't know that at the time. So I'll let y'all pass this time, Jeffrey. Let's not do this again next time.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we did pretty good, though, on some. Like Kentucky, they were a bowl team, but they weren't really, any better than that. They weren't like a top 25 team or anything, so that was right. We got Maryland right. They made a bowl. Auburn made a bowl, and that was one that a lot of people are saying, Auburn's not making a bowl. Well, they did. So, I mean, that was pretty solid there. Even though they looked terrible in the bowl game, they still made it. Miami made a bowl game.
Internet high five. We got it. Woo!
Miami made it. I mean, we did pretty good with a lot of it.
I will say, though, Jeffrey, real quick, not to cut you off, Kansas was one. I believe I said in the preseason, you can make an argument for them in the top 25. I did say that, and I will own up to that. But looking at it now, if Jalen Daniels, not Jaden, wrong one. Jalen Daniels does not get hurt, who knows? Maybe they could have made it into the top 25, maybe, but injuries may have done unforeseen that. But go ahead, though.
Hummus Hero dropping this. You forgot BC as a bowl team. They were still not good, Hummus Hero. They were still not good. I know they beat SMU, but SMU didn't have their starting quarterback. Rainy weather. I mean, credit to Boston College, but they were still one of the worst bowl teams. But you got to give them credit there. We will when we re-rank these teams. in a bit, we are going to put Boston College as a bowl team because they made it. But if they were in the SEC, they wouldn't have made it. But it is what it is. But, yeah, I mean, still, I'm pretty impressed. I mean, we did worse in this tier, but still, there's just so many teams. You're going to get a few wrong. Baylor was definitely one that was ugly. Wake Forest as well. Wake Forest, I almost didn't put. I think we really debated that one, if I recall. And I was like, should we put them in almost bowl team because they lost so much? But it's just when you're dealing with a guy like Dave Clawson who is consistent, right? And he's always getting them there no matter how small the talent is there. The talent pool is in Wake Forest. They usually get there. Same with Pitt. Like, we were just backing the longtime coaches, Pat Narduzzi, Dave Clawson, that they would get it done. I don't really feel like a lot of people in the preseason disagree with either of those selections. Like, no. I feel like Pitt, Wake Forest, most people expected that they would sneak in. Now, Syracuse did. They made a bowl game, but, man, they played bad in it. That's South Florida. I picked Syracuse, too. Worst mistake ever. Why did I pick Syracuse to beat South Florida? Horrible, but they made a bowl game, so we got it right.
Yeah, and I will say, Jeffrey, I think the way me and you think too, we've seen so much of this winning from those guys. We were kind of like, we kind of give them their credit, as some people have the approach of, which is not wrong, but some people have an approach of, if you haven't won anything major, it's kind of like, We kind of looked at it as, Pat Narduzzi, Pitt's always a great team, especially at home, which unfortunately we experienced that this year. I don't ever want to go to Pitt again. And don't ever put us on the CW again, okay, ACC? You hear me? Don't put us on the CW. And while you're at it, leave North Carolina off of it too. But that's just rant. But yeah, I think that's more the reason why we put them there. We back the good head coaches instead of let's put in the Tom Harry, who hasn't won his first year head coach. Let's do that. But you get my point.
Yeah, it's hilarious, though, to me that Louisville lost at Pitt, but North Carolina won at Pitt. But then you talk about North Carolina losing to Virginia, but Louisville beat Virginia. Like, you can't make this stuff up. And the CW, why? I mean, no. The network is cursed. I think only one favorite won there all year on that network. All the underdogs won. All of them, besides, I think, one. It was like a weird game or something like that between like Wake and Virginia. That's like both teams are so bad that, like, of course, it's going to go as expected there. But I mean, it's just, it was messed up how crazy the CW was this year. I agree. The Press Raiders fans says UNC wasted Drake May. When you have Drake May at North Carolina, when you have Caleb Williams at USC, you've got to do more with them. These teams wasted their QBs. You could have done so much more if you had a defense. But all these LSU, UNC, and USC let down their quarterbacks the most this year with their defense. Absolutely abysmal showing by all three of the team's defenses. He also says as well, Cal somehow made a bowl game. Yeah, Cal, they got it done. Like, unfortunately, I picked them to win the bowl game, and they didn't. But that was awesome that they were able to find a way to make a bowl game. But still, like I said before, I thought we did pretty solid with the bowl teams. Got a few wrong. Do you have any more thoughts before we move on to the almost bowl teams?
No, I just think overall, Jeffrey, this is one of the more harder ones to predict. And I think we did pretty good for preseason. Preseason, you're going in blind, basically, and just hoping for the best. But I think we did pretty good overall. Now on to the almost bowl teams, the teams that we thought would be come up just a wee bit short. And let's talk about it. Let's walk through this. I'm sure Jeffrey made some atrocious picks as well.
We did. One last thing before we do that, Will says Louisville beat Notre Dame 33-20. Pitt beat Louisville 38-21. Notre Dame beat Pitt 58-7. What is sports? There you go. Will summing it up. College football is unpredictable, and if you bet on it, you're going to have cardiac arrest every week. I mean, it's just the way it is. Like, it is so difficult to pick. But here we go right here. You've got the almost bowl teams. We put a few of them in that category, and this one, there is one team that if Joey was here, he would be like, I told you West Virginia was going to be better. Why did you do that? Yeah, that we messed up there. And then another one is Arizona. Why did we put Arizona in almost bowl teams? Because we didn't know Noah Fafita existed. Nobody knew Noah Fafita was going to go out there and ball out in the second half of the season. But other than that, a lot of these other ones we did do pretty right.
Jeffrey, why in the world did we put Vandy in there? Why? Explain to me that one. I'm looking at it now and I'm like, what in the world were we thinking? Vandy was terrible.
Vanderbilt went 2-10 and 0-8 in the SEC. They were bad. I mean, this is like old Vanderbilt, like the late 2000s Vanderbilt. They were horrible. I think we thought Clark Lee, they had a decent year. But the big thing for me is I didn't notice that Mike Wright transferred to Mississippi State. That's tough. And, oh, man, depressed Raiders fans and Mizzou on dumpster fire. Yeah, I just noticed that. Oh, my goodness. Oh, boy. But,
Jeffrey, Jeffrey, we'll get to that in just a second. But you can't predict this stuff. How did we know Missouri was going to go 11-2, win NY6, and beat one of the best Big Ten teams in all the country? I get it, Michigan fans. Stick with me here. I know you're the champions. I get it, but stick with me here. But who can predict this, Jeffrey? It's like who can predict this? And Rutgers and dumpster fire? Oh, we'll get that in just a second.
That's not as bad, though. That's not as bad as Mizzou.
So, Jeffrey, that means next year we have to put them in playoff team, right?
We'll have to see. I mean, it's going to be tough to replicate that. But, I mean, for the most part, though, these teams at the bottom, it's not that bad. I mean, Colorado wasn't that good. Michigan State wasn't that good. Mississippi State, they struggled. Nebraska struggled. Purdue struggled. Vandy struggled. Indiana struggled. I mean, it wasn't that bad for the most part with these almost bowl teams. We just got Arizona and West Virginia wrong.
Yeah. For these, I think it's pretty straightforward. Michigan State, they became a dumpster fire in the season because of the military allegations and then their quarterback and just the disarray that they had. So Michigan State, we weren't wrong in their thinking because you can't predict what's going to happen in the season. They became a dumpster fire mid-season. But like Nebraska, they truly were almost a bowl, but they lost some games that maybe they shouldn't have. Purdue, they went 4-8, but I don't. We got that on maybe a technicality. You could make a case they were dumpster fire.
There's a case for a lot of these, like Purdue, Colorado, Michigan State. There's an argument that they were a dumpster fire, but there's also an argument that they weren't completely abysmal either. I mean, a team like Nebraska, we nailed that. Nebraska should have been a bowl team. I mean, what happened down the stretch there? We're like, wasn't Nebraska like 5-3? I mean, all they had to do was win one of their last 4 games, and they lose them all. And it's like, oh no, Scott Frost all over again. Unbelievable. But Nebraska was close. I mean, the thing is, like, to me, the only team that I feel bad in retrospect putting in the almost bowl teams was West Virginia, because only reason I didn't have him as at least a bowl team is because Neil Brown. I just didn't trust Neil Brown. But West Virginia had a decent-looking team on paper. But Arizona, we didn't get that wrong in a way because no one expected it. Nobody did. It's because Noah Fafita came in at, I think after like game 4, because Jane Delore was starting quarter at the end of the season. Arizona was terrible. I think they lost to a bad team. I forgot who it was. They lost to a really bad team. And then Noah Fafita came in and just started balling out. That loss to USC, that was the game that woke people up because they didn't win the game, but he just was on fire. And I know USC's defense, but right on top for Tim, talking about USC's defense. Appreciate you being here, Tim. Says hello, Austin and Jeffrey. But yeah, Arizona came on after that, and Noah Fafita just balled out, and now everybody knows who he is. And won against Oklahoma. I did pick him against Oklahoma in the bowl game, but I think no one expected Arizona to be that good. So I feel like we deserve a little bit of credit there that just kind of hard to predict when you didn't know that Noah Fafita was going to do what he did because no one even knew who he was. But West Virginia's the only one that I'm a bit frustrated with. We should have at least put him in bowl team, but it is what it is. It's hard to trust Neil Brown, but now he's kind of gotten a little bit of a pat on his back.
Yeah, and before we move on, Mississippi State, I think we kind of nailed on the head. I believe they went 5-7.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they almost made a bowl, and for them, this was like almost a rebuilding year because of, God rest his soul, rest in peace, Mike Leach. One of the funniest guys in history. He'll always have a spot in college football hearts and minds. But this was kind of a rebuilding year for Mississippi State. So for them, it's kind of like you could kind of give them a pass. If they would have been like too terrible, it's kind of like, and it was kind of rebuilding year. They got to find their new identity. But overall, West Virginia and Arizona were the two, like you said, that we kind of maybe slept on a little bit. And Jeffrey, I must say this. I'm glad you talked me off that Colorado ledge. I was going to put them in the top 25. I was behind the Deion Sanders.
You were this close to NY6. Like, it was close. I'm like, whoa, no. We're talking about a team horrible last year, 1-11. It's Deion's first year coaching in the Power 4 level, Power 5 level. And I'm like, all these transfers, they got a terrible O-line. I don't know. I think they're not going to make a bowl. I'm so glad we did because we nailed Colorado. I will say one more thing, though. Indiana, I know some people are saying dumpster fire for Indiana. But the Hoosiers were 3-9, and they lost their last 3 games to Illinois, Michigan State, Purdue by 3, 3, and 4. So they were technically only 10 points away from being a bowl team. It is what it is. They didn't win those games, but they were very close. So I don't think they were an absolute dumpster fire. But
and Jeffrey, not to cut you off, sorry about that. And technicality, they took Penn State to their limit in Happy Valley too. Mm-hmm. Not that's something that they could tip their cap to. So a dumpster fire team like that would not have done that. So I agree. They do deserve just a wee bit of credit, just a wee bit. Jeffrey, it's prime time. It's always prime time. 24/7 a day. Get the swag out.
That's hilarious, man. But yeah, everybody is talking about it in chat, though. The biggest whiff we made. We did pretty good for the most part on this list, not getting many teams that wrong except Missouri. That was the one. And I don't know why we didn't even at least put them in almost bowl team. I really don't. Why did we put them in dumpster fire? Because, did we really think they were going to go 3-9 or 2-10? I don't know.
So here's the thing, Jeffrey. My preseason prediction, I don't know what you made for them. I'll my preseason prediction. I had Missouri 3-9. God rest my soul, but I did. I was like 3-9. This is going to be terrible. Like Missouri just looked like they were going in the wrong direction, and it was just like I'm not having much faith in this team. And it's like, and then we kind of talked each other into it. It's like, and it's like one of those things too, Jeffrey. They're in the SEC. It's not like if they were in the Pac-12, Big Ten, you can maybe make an argument. Hey, can Missouri get to 6 wins? Sure. But in the SEC, it's kind of like, especially what helps from Jeffrey is they missed Alabama, but they did take Georgia down to the wire. Now, that is a tip in their cap, but they did miss a lot of the better teams actually, no, they didn't. They did play LSU. They did play the Bulldogs. I don't think they played Ole Miss, but they missed a couple teams. But for the most part, their schedule was pretty good for them. And plus, that Kansas State victory really helped set the tone. That was one of the more surprising victories, I think, all year long, in my opinion. What are the chances makes that 61-yard field goal again? Probably not very good. But go ahead.
Yeah, that was a fantastic kick by Mevis. 61-yard field goal. Record in the SEC. Never been done before, and they got that win. And that's when Missouri got on the right trajectory. Like, if they lose that game, how their season would have gone, no idea. Would they have been anywhere close to as good? I don't know if they would have. Maybe they'd have been like 7-5 or something like that, or 6-6. But it is what it is. We just did not think about Luther Burden and Cody Schrader and Brady Cook and thinking that offense was going to look that good. And their defense, while not one of the best in college football, it wasn't that bad either. And Eli Drinkwitz had done nothing in the previous seasons of his tenure to showcase that Missouri was going to be anything more than a, close to 500 team. But yeah, they exploded. They were awesome this season. A few other that we got wrong. Obviously, Rutgers made a bowl game. We put them in dumpster fire. But, I mean, that wasn't horrible because a couple results go the other way. Rutgers could have been 4-8, 5-7. They wouldn't have made a bowl. But Rutgers did make a bowl. Got to give them credit there. We got Boston College wrong. Yes, they made a bowl game. But still, they're terrible. BC's not good. Jeff Hafley, he's just like, man, I'm so glad our schedule was so easy. I'm just so glad we skated by and somehow got 6 wins. Because that's what that was. They were barely beating Holy Cross and Army. Like, they were beating horrible teams by like 3. So they just skated on thin ice to get to a bowl game. They were the worst bowl team. I know they won, but I still believe they were the worst bowl team. But credit to the Golden Eagles. Cal somehow made a bowl game because they beat UCLA at the end of the season. When they lost to Auburn, I thought they weren't going to make it. But then they somehow beat UCLA. UCLA played terrible, and they got in. So that's awesome there for Cal. Georgia Tech, we got wrong. Iowa State, we got wrong because they made bowl games. Northwestern, we got wrong. But we did get Stanford and Virginia. But Virginia Tech made a bowl game. So I feel like this was our worst list. We did pretty bad here because there was a lot of teams that we had as dumpster fire teams that made bowls, but the worst one was Missouri because they did really well.
Yeah, Jeffrey, to put a bow on this, I think, like you said, BC, they were one that overperformed, like you said. And then when they beat SMU, now everyone's giving you grief about it. You're never going to be able to live that one down, Jeffrey. Just to let you know, that one's going to follow you in infamy right there. But Cal, they were another one that was, we thought maybe the Jeff Wilcox era was going the wrong way. Georgia Tech, they're a team that we didn't really know about. Iowa State, I don't know what made us think about them being there. Missouri was our biggest whiff, of course. Northwestern, Jeffrey, I think they had an angel watching them this year because nobody expected them to be this good. Because I remember, Jeffrey, when we talked in the preseason and looked at their schedule, I was trying to get them 4 wins, and you were like, I just can't see it. Where are you finding these 4 wins at, Austin? And I'm like, maybe they can upset Duke. Maybe they can upset an Illinois, something. And you were like, they might be lucky to win 2 games. I think a couple people had them going 0-12. And it's like, I don't know if they'll be that bad, but Stanford we nailed. Virginia, I think we nailed. Virginia Tech was looking like a dumpster fire, but then Brent Pryce like, oh, no. We're going to fix this now. Mm-hmm. And it kind of ruined that pick, but overall, I think we did okay.
Yeah, Virginia Tech changed quarterbacks, too, in the middle of the season. Kyron Drones came in for Grant Wells. If Grant Wells had been starting quarterback the whole season, I don't think Virginia Tech would have even sniffed the bowl or got close to it. But when they changed quarterbacks, that helped get them there. I mean, with a lot of these, it's not like Cal and BC and, Rutgers were all that good. It's not like they were really good or anything. They just made bowls. I mean, you got to realize there's not much difference between 6-6 and 4-8 and 3-9. There's not a lot of difference because you think about it. Like Indiana, like I said, 10 points away. They were literally 10 points away from making a bowl game. And then we would have been wrong with them. But I think that's why we got so many wrong because we were just expecting teams like Rutgers and Cal and BC to be like 4-8. And they overperformed a little bit. It's not like they were great, but they did enough to make a bowl game. Like I said, we got the Missouri one way wrong. I mean, it's just, it is what it is there. Everyone's going to have a whiff. But like Iowa State as well, I mean, Matt Campbell had been struggling lately. They were horrible last year. But again, they found their quarterback, little on through the season, Rocco Beck. And they ended up doing a little bit better. So it is what it is. But like Will said, yep, dumpster fire is actually dumpster fire. I mean, I don't know if we did that bad, but this to me was definitely our worst tier out of all of these. We got more teams wrong in this tier, but I still think overall in hindsight, we didn't do that bad on this list.
No, Jeffrey, I would grade this tier as maybe a B+, B-. It's not the worst tier I think we could have made, but Jeffrey, that's the great thing about it. Now we get to correct these mistakes. We're going to right the wrongs, and we're going to give credit where credit is due. And yes, we are looking at you, Boston College. I know. We're going to put you in bowl team. We're going to fix this. Don't you worry, Boston College. But Go ahead, though, Jeffrey.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I would give it probably a B minus. I would go B or B plus, but that Missouri one's just so bad. I gotta go B minus. But we did a satisfactory job overall. It wasn't a D or a C and it wasn't an A, but we did pretty solid overall. Pretty happy with what we did. I mean, you're always going to get some wrong, and even the professionals, like you go with like they had Northwestern going 3-9. They probably had Missouri going 5-7. So I mean, nobody's perfect. So we did pretty good. But here's the new list right here. We've got CFP contenders again, NY6, top 25 teams, bowl teams, almost bowl teams, and dumpster fire and trash. And here are all the teams, including the additions to the Big 12. They're here as well. Cincinnati, BYU, all of that. So we're going to rank them. And I mean, I don't know where we would have ranked them in, the preseason, but it is what it is with that. We've got the new list. We're about to start ranking them.
Yeah, I'm ready to get into it, Jeffrey. This is going to be a lot of fun. Looking forward to it. And, let's get this started, shall we? And let's get it started. Start us off, Jeffrey. Where are we starting?
The first team on the list, if we're doing it alphabetically, you got Alabama. The Crimson Tide, I don't know if it's just perfectly alphabetical, but it is close to it. But Alabama, they made the college football playoff. So, I mean, definitely they're going to go easy peasy into the CFP contenders because they did end up making the college football playoff. Very impressive season for Alabama, especially considering the fact that the way when they lost to Texas, a lot of people thought that Alabama was not going to make the playoffs. I mean, a lot of people like Alabama's finished. They're probably going to go 8-4. They're the new Clemson. They're falling apart. But they got it together. Somehow were able to beat Auburn. I mean, that game will live in infamy in Alabama history. 4th and 31. Especially if Alabama had won the title this year. People be like, the 4th and 31 got us there. But they still made the playoff because of that. Because I know that they beat Georgia, and that was very impressive. But if they don't beat Auburn with the 4th and 31 play, they wouldn't even have gotten in if they beat Georgia. So it's crazy. But Alabama defied the odds after the Texas loss. Jalen Milroe, they got it together. And in Nick Saban's final season, cannot believe I'm still saying that. Nick Saban gone from Alabama football. It's surreal. It's been there my entire life, basically, it seems, at Alabama. I was 3 years old when he took over in 2007. But Alabama, they made the college football playoff. Very successful season.
Yeah, no arguments here, Jeffrey. You summed it up pretty good. I would add that maybe, even after what looked like maybe could have been a failure of a season to some Crimson Tide fans, which 10-2 to me is not a failure, but some Alabama fans, as we know, are a little out there and they think 10-2 is terrible, but they are in CFP contender because they did make it, and they're one that's definitive, and no arguments needed for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, up next we've got a debatable one because Will bring in the argument. Would you say Arizona is NY6 contender? They should have been there instead of Liberty. I mean, unfortunately, it is what it is. With you gotta have the group of 5 team. In the New Year's Six. But, man, why did they not go with SMU? I know SMU didn't start the quarterback, but if SMU was in that game, I would have believed that the starting quarterback would have played. And SMU, they would have got blown out against Oregon, but maybe it'd have been a little bit better. Liberty got destroyed. As depressed Raiders fans, how did Liberty even make it? They got exposed. Yeah, that was ugly. But Arizona, I mean, they didn't make NY6, and they started out rough, but they came on down the stretch, like I said, with Noah Fafita coming in. It's very debatable whether you want to put them in NY6 or just top 25. What do you think, Austin?
So I can see the argument for the NY6 because they did come down the stretch looking really, really good. But, Jeffrey, we also have to take into account, too, they lost a lot of their big games as well. We do have to take into account they didn't beat Washington. They didn't beat USC. That kind of does hinder it just a little bit. But they did have that great win over Oklahoma in the bowl game with the 6 turnovers. All credit to them. Noah Fafita, fantastic. Arizona's found their next quarterback unless he transfers. It goes to Washington with Jed Fish, which would be heartbreaking for Arizona fans. But, Jeffrey, I would say put them in top 25 because the way that they've come on as of late, I think they've earned that. But NY6, I can't see it because they lost all of their big games. You didn't beat Washington. You didn't beat USC. Now, maybe you did win one of those. We can maybe have a little bit better of a conversation, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if Noah Fafita played the entire season, there's a shot if they don't lose that early game to a not very good opponent. I think Arizona might have been in NY6. They were very impressive. It was awesome seeing how well they were doing. And as always, when you do good at a school like Arizona, you lose your coach. It's terrible. Kalen DeBoer goes to Alabama, and then Washington gets Jed Fish. Arizona losing their guy. They were doing so good. It's just unfortunate. We'll have to see if Arizona can keep it up. But at least for this season, definitely top 25 team with an argument for NY6. Up next, we got Arizona State. I mean, there's not much else to say. They were bad.
Jeffrey, fire up the dumpster. Put them in. No arguments.
Yeah. They were so bad. I mean, you remember that Colorado game? That Colorado-Arizona State game that Colorado won with a field goal at the end? That was an ugly game. Terrible.
Is there any redeeming qualities that maybe we could, not bury them too much? Or try to be nice to the poor Sun Devils, but they were dumpster fire.
I mean, Arizona State, the problem, for them is that, it was Dillingham's first season, and he's a young coach, and I mean, he has a lot that he's going to have to do to turn around the program. I mean, it's like they can't bring in consistent talent like they were. I mean, when Herm Edwards was there, they had Jaden Daniels, they had Brandon Ayuk, they had Eno Benjamin. That was the last year they were decent. That was in 2019 when they knocked off Oregon, when they had Justin Herbert. But after that, Herm Edwards got in trouble, all that, and they've just been bad. So it is what it is. I mean, looking at their season, I mean, the only wins they got were over Southern Utah, UCLA, and Washington State. And probably their most impressive game was when they lost to Washington 15-7. Like they for some reason were able to almost keep it close with Washington and have a shot to win. Washington played terrible in that game, but I still think that overall they were a dumpster fire. Like Will said, I mean, there's not much else. They were 3-9, so they weren't even close to a bowl. Yeah. And unlike Indiana, where you look at their schedule, most of the games they did get blown out in, so it wasn't that impressive.
Yeah, 100% agree. And real quick, and the fact is, Jeffrey, that Washington game wasn't in the desert either. That's what made it even more impressive, in my opinion. It's like you were in Husky Stadium and you had them reeling. It'd be like, okay, it's the desert. It gets a little wonky out there. We get the whole 9 yards. But that was in Washington Stadium, and they were still able to keep that thing close. And, well, Jeffrey, I see the next team coming up. This is a mistake we're going to correct now because this is one of our biggest ones that we whiffed on. Go ahead.
Arkansas, they went 4-8 and 1-7 in the league in the SEC. Not a good season at all for Sam Pittman. He's doing everything he possibly can right now to turn the team around. But I mean, losing Rocket Sanders, losing KJ Jefferson, it's not that great as of now. But still trying to make some moves. I mean, it's either almost bowl team or trash. Will saying Arkansas was trash. I mean, they never really looked like they were going to compete for a bowl, which, I mean, kind of is the qualification for almost bowl team. I mean, it's up to you on where you want to put them, but I could go either way.
I'm kind of like you, Jeffrey. I'm going either way with them because they look bad at times. But then they look decent. Like, there for a bit, they were like, maybe there is hope. I mean, Jeffrey, they almost beat Alabama. So they must not be too new. That's the thing with Arkansas. They're so frustrating because they lost to Alabama by 3 on the road, like in Tuscaloosa. I will say, Jeffrey, just for that performance, I'll say almost bowl team because if you were that bad, I don't think you would catch Alabama slipping at home. Now, get this isn't the Bama Bowl, but I would put Arkansas on almost bowl team. But if you want to put them in dumpster fire, we can. There's
Yeah,
argument for
there's a couple other performances for me that's tilting Arkansas to almost bowl team because they lost to LSU 34-31 on the road. They barely lost that game, and they only lost at Ole Miss 27-20. So against three really good teams, they were all one-score games. Yeah, they got to be an almost bowl team. That's not a dumpster fire. You can't perform that well against three teams like Alabama, Ole Miss, and LSU and be put in dumpster fire. So, plus they also had a 7-3 loss to Mississippi State in there, a 38-31 loss to BYU. There was a lot of close games.
Yeah, 100% agree, Jeffrey. On to the next team, shall we?
This one's easy. Auburn bowl team, and that's it. I mean, they made a bowl game, but what else is there to say? They went 6-6, and then they got destroyed in the bowl game to Maryland.
Yeah, this one's pretty easy, cut straightforward bowl team. And no, your moral victories do not count for top 25 wins. You stop doing that, Auburn fans. We get it. You almost beat Alabama, but you had incompetent play calling at the wrong time. Next.
Yeah, I mean, there's literally nothing else to say. Like, they didn't win. As close as they were to beating Alabama, they had a 99.9% chance in the FBI predictor in that game on the 4th and 31 to win. They didn't win, so it doesn't count. But up next, we got Baylor, who went 3-9 and 2-7 in conference play. Very disappointing season for the Bears. Dave Aranda in a whole lot of trouble. I mean, like, looking at their schedule, they barely lost to Houston. They barely lost to West Virginia. But other than that, most of their other performances were pretty ugly. They got blown out against Texas Tech. They got blown out against Kansas State. They did almost beat Utah. But in hindsight, that wasn't, that impressive because it was at Baylor. And Utah had a backup quarterback all season. So Utah's offense wasn't that great. Again, it's up to you. But I agree with Will and D here. Getting blown out by Texas State is dumpster fire. I mean, that was bad. The Texas State. But it was week 1, but they still were pretty bad.
Yeah, Jeffrey. But they did have that epic comeback win, though. I do have to say. They did have that epic comeback win.
Over
that
UCF.
That could possibly save them right now. But, they had too much bad this year. Even that comeback can't save them, in my opinion. Fire up the dumpster. Arizona State's getting lonely in there.
Yeah, I mean, the UCF comeback was very impressive because I picked UCF to win. And I was like, oh, it's 35-7. It's an easy win for UCF. And then I look at an hour later and I'm like, Baylor, what in the world? 36-35. How did that happen? It was unbelievable. But other than that, there was just nothing noteworthy about the season for the Bears. It was terrible.
Now, Jeffrey, time for you to pay your pendants. Put Boston College where they rightfully belong. Bowl team, there you go, hummus hero. Jeffrey is paying for his pendants. Boston College is going in bowl team. Even though they do not deserve it, I do agree with you, Jeffrey. They do not deserve it, but that's not how college football works. They got the required wins, and they got a great win over SMU.
I mean, if they were in the Big Ten East or the SEC, yeah. I mean, Boston College is not making a bowl game. They're going 3-9. I mean, they'd have been horrible, but the ACC was so bad. I will never forget in my life, Boston College playing Syracuse and Garrett Schrader. He was out. And the backup quarterback for Syracuse threw for a grand total of 37 passing yards and 4 interceptions. And Boston College won by like 7. It was like 17-10. It's like if Syracuse had Garrett Schrader, there's no way Boston College wins that game. So they barely made a bowl game. It is what it is. But since they got there, we got to put them there. Congratulations yet again to Boston College for your terrible season that somehow ended with 6 wins. Up next, we got BYU. I mean, BYU was 5-7, 2-7 in the Big 12. It looked like for the most part that they were going to make a bowl game, but then they collapsed down the stretch. I mean, to me, it's almost bowl team.
Yeah, I agree, Jeffrey. You could put them in almost bowl. I'm in agreement with you. No arguments here. They just pulled Nebraska and collapsed down the stretch. So
Will says they lost their last 5 games, dumpster fire. But I mean, to me, 5-7 is the quintessential almost bowl team, though, right? I mean, you went 5-7, you're 1 game away. And I mean, looking at BYU's schedule from this past season, they lost to Kansas by 11. They lost to Oklahoma by 7, and they lost to Oklahoma State by 7. So they're by 6. So they had 3 games where they were literally, 1 score away from winning. I mean, that to me is like almost bowl team.
yeah, almost bowl team. I agree. Cal, we could put them in bowl team. Not much else to brag about with them as well. They're a team that they made the bowl. I don't think there's any other discussion for them. Now,
Yeah, these 6-16 are the easiest. Like, they made a bowl game. There's nothing else you could say. It doesn't matter how bad or good they were. They made a bowl game, so you got to put them there.
Now, Clemson, there's an argument for Clemson. So what do we want to do with Clemson, Jeffrey? Do we want to put them in top 25, or do we just want to slide them into bowl team? I don't think NY6 is the proper place for them. No. They're either bowl team or top 25.
They finished 20th in the rankings, which I know there might be a little bit of bias there because Clemson is a brand, which is why they finished. Because it's like Texas. A lot of people are like, why is Texas ranked or Tennessee ranked all the time when they're like 8-4? So, I mean, they're, again, probably a little bit of bias there with Clemson being, for the last 10 to 15 years, a really good program. But, I mean, looking at what they did knock off Notre Dame. They did knock off North Carolina. So, I mean, those are a couple decent wins there. I expect Notre Dame's a good win, obviously, but North Carolina was a solid win. They lost to Miami, NC State, Florida State, and Duke. Duke was in week 1, though, with Riley Leonard. So, obviously, if they played them down the stretch of the season without him, then I think Clemson would have beat Duke, beat South Carolina. They beat Kentucky in the bowl. I mean, I think just because of the fact that they made the top 25 at the end of the season at number 20 and they went 9-4, they have to be top 25.
Yeah, I can get with that. Top 25, most certainly. UCF, Jeffrey, they're an interesting team because they're like the Jekyll and Hyde, like Jackson always says. They're the Jekyll and Hyde of the Big 12. So how do you want to grade them? Do you want to put them in top 25 or do they belong in just bowl team in your opinion? Because they had that great win over Oklahoma State, but then they had that head scratcher to a team that we just put in the dumpster fire. How do we want to grade them?
UCF, they went 6-7, so they're just a bowl team. I mean, they didn't have that good of a year overall. They made the bowl game and they didn't win it, so there's really not much discussion there. I know that they were up and down, and they deserve some credit for being competitive against some of the better teams, but they also had some bad losses. I mean, the Baylor loss, not good. I mean, that was just very bad. So I think, like Will said, they're definitely a bowl team. Yeah, Kristen Moore, appreciate for being us as top 25 on Clemson. And Tim, appreciate, says, I love the Young Guns group, my favorite people. Appreciate that, Tim. Love doing live streams with Austin. Will, got some great content coming for sure, but appreciate you for being here, Tim. And it's going to be a lot of fun going through the rest of these teams. But yeah, UCF, I think, is definitely cut and dry bowl team.
And yeah, I agree, Jeffrey, 100%. Now looking at it, realizing they finished under 500, it kind of wipes away those good wins they did accumulate. Duke, they're another team that a lot of people that they got shocked by Duke because they were like 28-7. Oh my gosh, is Duke possibly going to be the dark horse ACC team that's going to play Florida State, or maybe Clemson gets it going again? And it's like, well, then Riley Leonard gets hurt that Notre Dame game, and then it kind of all like falls apart, and it's like, and then they had that great bowl win over Troy, which I did pick Duke in that game, and a lot of people were like picking Troy, and it's like, I don't know. I'm like, Jordan Waters, he's a heck of a running back. Hey, he's a guy that can definitely change the game on a dime. I'm like, he's going to be a big factor why they win or lose this game. And lo and behold, he was one of the big reasons why they did get that win. But for me, Jeffrey, I could throw Duke in maybe top 25 because they had that win over Clemson. And, they did keep it close with Florida State, and they did keep it close with Notre Dame.
Yeah, I think the biggest issue, though, I'm kind of with Will here, though. He says if Riley Leonard didn't get hurt, they're definitely top 25. No argument. But him getting hurt, Duke really struggled down the stretch of the season. And that Troy Bowl win is kind of, neutered down a bit because of the fact you look at Troy and the entire football team basically had a stomach bug. And all the players played absolutely terrible in that game. Duke wasn't doing anything either, but Duke with the backup quarterback did just enough. Troy, the quarterback for Troy, Gunnar Watson, normally throws for a lot more yards than he did in that bowl game. But his throws were weak. He could tell he was not feeling good. Duke finished 8-5, but they didn't finish in the top 25. And it's very unfortunate because they should have. I will completely reiterate, like Will said, they should have been a top 25 team because I know for sure that if Riley Leonard does not get injured, Duke's not losing to Virginia, right? It's just not happening. And if they beat Virginia, then Duke would have gone 9-4 and they might have squeaked in. And maybe they'd have beat North Carolina too. They might have been able to knock off the Tar Heels if he was in. So it is what it is. I think they got to go in bowl team just because they didn't finish in the top 25 and they performed bad down the stretch. But that's with a caveat. With Riley Leonard, they would have been. So I'll put them at the top of the bowl team. That's one of the best ones.
Yeah, Jeffrey, to me, I think they belong in the top 25. But if you believe that they belong in the bowl team, we could put them at the top with a little caveat. Like if Riley Leonard stays healthy, they certainly are.
That's the frustrating thing because I believe they were. I'm with you. I want to, but the end result wasn't there. It's just so unfortunate and frustrating with a caveat like that, and it happens with a lot of teams. Like you want to put them a tier or two higher, but it's like you didn't have the results, so it's unfortunate. But I do agree they are a top 25 team with Riley Leonard, but it just unfortunately did not happen with his injury.
Yeah, 100% agree. And speaking of a team that didn't have results, Florida. Jeffrey, we know where to put them. Almost bowl team, unfortunately. They were a team that they looked terrible against Utah. We thought this was going to be a disaster. At least I did. I don't know about Jeffrey. I don't know what he thinks. I won't speak for him, but I thought it might be like, oh, this is going to be a bad year. Billy Napier, his seat's going to be cooking by game 3 of the year. But then they go into Gainesville and beat Tennessee, and it's like, holy crap, maybe Florida, maybe that was just a fluke. And then it's like they were up and down, up and down, up and down. And they finished 5-7. So almost bowl team is where they belong. And they did not win 6 games, so we cannot put them in bowl team.
Yeah, the thing with Florida to me is that I had them going 6-6 this past season. In my preseason prediction, I had them going 6-6. Will had them going 5-7. So we were very close. And Florida should have been 6-6 because what in the world happened against Arkansas? They're at home and they're winning the game, and then they lose in overtime. That was a terrible loss. And then they almost beat Missouri. Everybody saw that game. And that's another thing. We're talking about Missouri. Everyone's talking about that K-State game set up. What happened? Missouri plays Florida. And I think if I'm correct, the game was in Missouri. It was at Missouri, and Florida played well. They lost 33-31, and literally it took a field goal late again for Missouri to win. Sometimes it's just your season, right? Sometimes every game that's close goes your way. And for Florida, it did not. So in my opinion, Florida was on paper, talent-wise, obviously, they were a bowl team. They should have been a bowl team. But you can't put them there because they weren't a bowl team. They should have beat Arkansas and they should have beat Missouri, but they blew those games down the stretch. And I'm with you. I thought they were going to be awful after the Utah game. So credit to Florida for hanging in there and doing better, getting that big one over Tennessee. But, man, why did you lose to Arkansas at home? That was terrible. That was a bad loss. And it is what it is for Florida, but since they didn't get 6 wins, you just can't put them there.
Yeah, you can't put them in bowl team. Sorry, Florida. But – oh, boy, this one is going to be one. You can feel the tension coming up. Go ahead, Jeff.
Florida State, everybody's favorite talking point Favorite team to talk about this season because of what happened down the stretch. You had everybody on the backs of Florida State. This is a great football team. They're going to make the college football playoff. And then Jordan Travis gets the gruesome injury that nobody wants to see again. It was ugly. Hate it for him that his college career ended that way. It was an abysmal injury. And what made it worse is it was in a game that was irrelevant. They were playing a bad team, and he got hurt. It sucked for them. And then they go out there and they play Florida, and you could just tell this team wasn't the same. It didn't matter, that the defense was great still with Jared Verse and all those guys out there. And you still had Jaheim Bell and Keon Coleman on offense, but Tate Rodemaker was not doing what Jordan Travis did. So they barely beat Florida. And then they play Louisville in the ACC championship game, and Brock Glenn struggling out there because obviously Rodemaker had the concussion. They didn't want to play him. And they were able to beat Louisville because the defense, yet again, shut down Louisville's offense. But you could just tell Florida State's offense was terrible, and if they made the playoff, they were going to get blitzed. But what's so frustrating is they went undefeated. They went undefeated. They were a power conference champion, a Power 4, Power 5, whatever you want to call it anymore, conference champion. They won the ACC, and they were undefeated, but they didn't make the playoff. And to me, they should have made the playoff. I understand that they would have gotten blown out. We're all in agreement there. We saw what Georgia did. I know that, and there was a lot more opt-outs for Florida State. If they didn't have all the opt-outs, it wouldn't have been that ugly. But it is what it is for Florida State. They didn't make the college football playoff because the committee decided to bend the rules and not go like what they did with Cincinnati and TCU, who clearly were not one of the 4 best teams, but they let them in. But since we have CFP contender, in my opinion, they belong there because they were there to the end and they should have made it.
Yeah, 100% agree, Jeffrey. Put them in CFP contender. Even with the Jordan Travis injury, they went unbeaten. They won the ACC. They won a Power 5 conference. And the way the committee had been doing it, if you won a Power 5 conference, you didn't get left out. And this year they changed the rules, and it was not right for Florida State for that to happen to them. But that is what happened to them, unfortunately. But they are a CFP contender by our metrics here.
Yeah, Will says something. It's really interesting. This is a great point. Florida State should have played Liberty instead of Georgia. Maybe it would have been a good game. Yeah. Liberty, easiest schedule in the FBS, undefeated, playing a decimated Florida State team. That would have been a good game, probably. That's a really good point. And then Tim, he says, I'm so glad I didn't see the Travis injury. I never watched injury replays after Joe Theismann. Yeah, that was one of the – well, I've seen that one on YouTube. That's bad. That was horrible. I mean, I've seen a lot of it. Alex Smith, I saw that one. That one happened actually not on YouTube, but in real life. I was alive for that. That was terrible when he played for Washington. So in the NFL, it's just been a lot of bad injuries. It's very unfortunate that Travis suffered an injury when they were having such a great season. It is what it is. Another team, though, that's debatable is Georgia because, like Florida State, they were a CFP contender the entire season. They were undefeated. Everybody was like, they're the best team. Or maybe it's Michigan. They're the best team. But when Alabama beat Georgia, they knocked Georgia out. But there was an argument, and a lot of Georgia fans made this argument that they were still one of the 4 best teams, which they were probably. There's really no argument there. I don't think that they were one of the 4 best teams. But they didn't get in because of when they lost. Just say Georgia played Alabama in week 1 of the season and they lost, or week 2 of the season, and then Georgia wins out the rest of the way and they win the SEC championship game. They're in the playoff. They're in. But because they lost to Bama when they did, Bama won, they got in, Georgia didn't. But I think if you want to put in NY6, no problem, totally get it. But I think they're a CFP contender too because they were there the entire way and they had an argument to be in.
Yeah, Jeffrey, I'm in agreement. Put them in CFP contender like we had them in the preseason. They truly were a contender until the very end. If they wouldn't have lost to Alabama, they would have been in for sure. And even then, Jeffrey, I wouldn't have been surprised if they would have put Bama and Georgia both in. Did something screwy like that. Then people would have really.
That would have irritated the entire college football world. You didn't put Texas in and they beat Bama. You left out Florida State as well. You put 2 SEC teams in there. What are you doing? Oh, man, that would have been ugly.
It would have started a whole big ruckus like, oh, so ESPN is getting paid off, huh? Our suspicions are true. It would start a whole big
It would have
Like,
been bad.
but yeah, CFP contender for Georgia. 100% agree. They are one of the 4 best teams, maybe even the best team still, even though Michigan won it all. I know Michigan fans may not like that, but it's still truth.
They were really good, and there's definitely an argument for sure. Georgia Tech, bowl team. That's easy.
Yeah, Georgia Tech bowl team, no problem. Houston, go on and put them in dumpster fire. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm looking at what they did. Big 12. Yeah, 4-8, 2-7. I mean, they weren't completely awful, and it was their first year in the Big 12, but Dana Holgerson got fired. They were pretty bad.
Yeah, dumpster fire. And Jeffrey, they needed a miracle against West Virginia. It's time for you to go in dumpster fire, Houston.
That game was entertaining, though. A lot of people only care about the big games, the top 25 teams, but you got to give credit where credit's due. That was an entertaining game.
Oh, it was, Jeffrey. It was a fantastic game. But still, Houston was a dumpster fire. Even you have to admit. They're the first team on the dumpster fire, but they were a dumpster fire. Now, this next year, Illinois. Would we consider them a dumpster fire?
They went 5-7, 3-6 in the Big Ten. I mean, they weren't good, and they were in the Big Ten West, but they didn't get a coach fired. And I mean, one went away. I mean, if you're 5-7, it's almost like you have to automatically be an almost bowl team if you go 5-7.
Okay, put them in almost bowl team, no problem here. And now, Jeffrey, Indiana, make the argument that they should be an almost bowl team to the people that want to put them in dumpster fire, because you know that I will support whichever way you go with them.
This is the thing. The things that make Indiana a dumpster fire is because Tom Allen got fired. I get that. And they went 3-9, and that was ugly. But Indiana was so close. One score away, one big mistake at the end away from possibly being able to knock off Penn State in Happy Valley, which a dumpster fire team does not do. And then in the final 3 games of the regular season against Illinois, Michigan State, and Purdue, they lost by 3, 3, and 4. So they were 10 points away from making a bowl game. They were this close. To me, that's not a dumpster fire. And I mean, you look at the fact that Indiana's offensive line play got a lot better from the previous season. Indiana's defense got better from the previous season. They were better than last year, even though Indiana went 4-8. I believe that this year's team that went 3-9 was better than last year's 4-8 team. I know Tom Allen got fired, but that's because Indiana's trying to up their game in football. They got Signetti. I mean, if this was Indiana from 5 years ago, there's no way they're firing Tom Allen. But they realize with the new Big Ten money, they got to compete. They got to do something. So I know Will's like, come on, Jeffrey. He's not buying it. I get it. If you want to put them in dumpster fire, I get it. If we do, though, I'm putting them clearly as the best dumpster fire because they were not that bad. But there is an argument to be made that they are an almost bowl team just because of the fact that of what I said. They were actually very close to making a bowl.
Jeffrey, I'm going to agree with you, almost bowl team, because they took Penn State to the limit. Like, dumpster fire does not do that. Like, and I know people are going to say, but Arizona State, they took Washington to the limit. But yeah, but if we're going to treat Arkansas with respect with the way they handle their teams, we got to do the same with Indiana, Jeffrey. Put some respect on it. Put them in almost bowl. I think we could do that.
The worst one. We'll put them as the worst almost bowl team. But yeah, to me, that's not a dumpster fire, especially because Indiana trying to trend in the right direction here. They're looking better than those other teams. So we'll be kind of nice. I mean, Will says if Arizona State's dumpster fire, they don't beat Washington and IU's trash. But come on, I mean, do you believe Indiana was that bad? Arizona State was in the Pac-12. They lost to Colorado. Indiana was in the Big Ten East. Tougher schedule. That counts as well. Tougher schedule.
Yeah. I'm with you, Jeffrey. I think people give Indiana enough credit. Good grief. Well, here's another juicy one, Jeffrey. Iowa. Are we putting them on borderline NY6? Because they could have made it possibly. Could have.
I think Iowa's top 25. I mean, there's an argument, but I mean, like, Iowa was not that good. I know the Minnesota game with Cooper DeJean, that was bad. The ending was so bad for that. They should have won. But I don't know. It's just the West, the Big Ten East is a lot better than the Big Ten West. I know I'm praising the Big Ten, but Big Ten West was awful. Iowa barely beating all these garbage teams or just mid-level teams in the West. And they got destroyed against Tennessee.
Yeah.
Destroyed.
Well, Jeffrey, I know Iowa fans would be like, if that Minnesota game and we would have had 11 wins, and they probably would have had to consider us for NY6. But I agree with you. I personally put them in top 25, but some people would have them as NY6 team, depending on who you are.
Yeah, and I mean, there is an argument there, but just Iowa clearly is not one of the 15 best teams in college football. Their defense is great, but that offense is so bad, it drags it down. It drags everything down. So Iowa finished in the top 25, but it's going to be really awesome for Iowa if they can do that in the new Big Ten. It's going to be a lot harder with all these new teams. Up next, we got Iowa State. They made a bowl game. Pretty solid year for Matt Campbell's squad. They went 7-6, so they weren't a top 25 team, but they made a bowl game. So I think that's pretty cut and dry.
Yeah, put them in bowl team, Jeffrey. Same with Kansas, I think. You could put them in bowl team. I mean, they did have that great win over Oklahoma, but is that enough to warrant a top 25, in your opinion?
Kansas finished 23rd in the AP poll. They went 9-4 and 5-4 in the Big 12. And if you look at their schedule, I'm pulling it up real quick. And they were up and down this year. I mean, because of the injuries. It was very impressive what Lance Leipold was able to do, considering, Jason Bean was injured some, and Daniels was injured. He missed most of the year. And then they had a third string guy coming, Ballard. But they beat Oklahoma. They were able to almost beat Kansas State. Couldn't get that one done. But they beat UCF big. They beat Illinois. They beat Cincinnati. I mean, they don't have a lot of great wins other than Oklahoma. And their losses, they lost to Texas, Texas Tech, like I said, Kansas State, Oklahoma State. I mean, it's close. It's like borderline, but they did finish in the top 25. So
I would say this, Jeffrey. If you want to put them in the top 25, we can. Me personally, I would put them ahead of Duke in the bowl team category. They're right there, in my opinion.
It's just tough. I mean, it's tough because they finish ranked, but rankings are subjective. Obviously, we know that with Mark Rogers, the voice of college football, like the teams ranked from 20 to like 35. There's not much difference. You could really, shuffle them any which way and it'd be about the same. So, I mean, I agree. Just because they finished 23rd doesn't necessarily mean that they actually were a top 25 team. But, and to be fair, like with Duke, how you said, and I agree with you, Riley Leonard, if he's not injured, this is a top 25 team. Well, if Kansas had Jalen Daniels, there's a good shot that they're beating Texas Tech. They're not losing that game. There's a good shot they beat Oklahoma State as well. Maybe they wouldn't have beat Texas because Texas was on a mission. And maybe they wouldn't have knocked off Kansas State, even though they only lost by 4, even without Jalen Daniels. So it's like if they had Jalen Daniels, they're clearly a top 25 team. With Jason Bean, it's borderline, and without him, with Ballard at the third string, they weren't a top 25 team. But that's the same thing with Duke. But they finished top 25. They were 9-4. Duke was 8-5. I mean, I'm with you. It's either they're the best bowl team here or they're like one of the worst top 25 teams. Which one do you want to do?
I say they're the best bowl team to give them proper respect. Kansas State, they're another interesting one. They went 9-4. They won the Pop-Tarts Bowl against NC State 28-19. They almost beat Texas. If they hadn't have gone for it on fourth down, who knows what would have happened. They did beat Kansas, who we said is the best bowl team. So that does really help on that side of the spectrum. I mean, Jeffrey, is there an argument for them to be top 25? Or do you want to put them in bowl team as well?
I mean, they finished 18th in the top 25 poll. Kansas finished 23rd. They went 6-3 in the Big 12. Kansas went 5-4. And Kansas State, I mean, they literally lost to Missouri on a field goal by 3, and they ended up having a good year. They lost to Oklahoma State by 8. They lost to Texas by 3, had a shot to win, and they lost to Iowa State by 7. Every one of their losses were by 1 score, and they got a good bowl win over NC State. That was a solid bowl win. I would go with top 25.
Yeah, I'm okay with that, Jeffrey. If you want to put them in top 25, we can do it. Kentucky, they're pretty cut and dry. Bowl team.
Yeah. They were solid. I mean, they went 7-6, had a decent year. I mean, they found a way toward the end to be respectable, and they gave Clemson a great game in the bowl game. Just couldn't get it done. I think, they're not top 25, but definitely a bowl team because they made it.
LSU, they're definitely top 25, but are they on the border of NY6 contender? This is where the debate will begin. And if Will's listening, I know he would want to put them in dumpster fire, but Will, personal feelings aside.
That's a good one there because of Brian Kelly. I mean, this one's tough because they finished. Yeah, there he is. No. I mean, they finished 12th in the AP poll, which is borderline NY6. They went 10-3, 6-2 in the SEC. And if you look at their schedule, I mean, the Florida State loss at the beginning of the year wasn't that good. I mean, obviously, they got pretty much trounced in that game, but it is week 1. Sometimes take it with a grain. And their only other losses the entire year was a 2-score loss to Alabama that Jaden Daniels got knocked out of the game. If he didn't get knocked out of the game, it might have been closer. Maybe LSU has a shot. And they only lost to Ole Miss by 6 on the road. And we know how good Ole Miss finished their season. They had wins over Missouri. But outside of that, I mean, A&M was a decent win. Florida, all right. But, I mean, Missouri was their best win. But they don't really have a bad loss. There's an argument for NY6, but I think their defense was so bad that top 25 probably makes more sense. But with Jane Daniels, it's close.
I will say this, Jeffrey, if you want to put them in top 25, we can, and maybe put them ahead of Arizona as maybe the best top 25 we've got to this point.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would be fair. Whichever one you would like to do. If you think they deserve to be in NY6, go for it. They're really close, in my opinion.
I mean, it is. I'm very, very tempted to put them there, but it's just the defense. Like, they would have been if their defense was better. It's just very unfortunate for them. They finished in the rankings in the conversation. But I do think that probably the best top 25 team, at least for now. But it's very, very close. Oh, boy. See, this is the problem, Austin. This is the issue. Because realistically, if I asked you, who's the better team, LSU or Louisville, I mean, maybe you'll say Louisville, but I think realistically you would say LSU. But technically, Louisville's got a better argument for NY6 than LSU does, even though LSU's a better team. This is interesting.
Jeffrey, you didn't even let me get a word out before you rained on the parade. But here's the thing. I will say, Jeffrey, in all honesty, if you're comparing the talent on the paper, LSU is better. Mm-hmm. No doubt about it. The only thing that helps our argument is we had a better defense and maybe a better running back. Quarterback, LSU's got that by a long shot. I mean, Jaden Daniels may be a top 10 draft pick in some people's eyes. Who knows? But the reason why I think you could put us not only in top 25, but NY6 contender is because we finished second in the ACC. And someone's got to go to the Orange Bowl out of the ACC if Florida State makes it. And that would have been us. So by default, we kind of had to be there. Mm-hmm. Now, Jeffrey, I know you've been very, I won't say gun shy on Louisville, but you've been trying to make a point that we're a product of the schedule. So I'll say, Jeffrey, I'll leave it to you. If you truly think we deserve NY6 contender, you could put us there. But if not, we're at least a top 25 team, especially after the year we had. I'll leave it to you.
And I mean, it's tough because you let me put Indiana in almost bowl team. You gave me that. But it's just so tough because, like, LSU, again, is clearly better. than Louisville, but we didn't put them there because they went, 10-3, didn't make the NY6. Louisville, though, like you said, by default should have made it, but Florida State got screwed out of the playoff. It's just very tough because Louisville finished 19th in the ranking. They lost the bowl game to a not so great USC team. Sorry, Tim, but I mean, USC legitimately wasn't all that great. And it's like, is that really, NY6 material? Because think about it. Louisville had a shot to beat Florida State without Travis. They had a shot, and they didn't do it. I mean, they should have done it. And that's the problem. I mean, like if they beat Florida State, they're in the NY6. They're there. And they didn't do it. So to me, that's just like, no, can't do it. But I mean, they still should have been there though, because Florida State should have made the playoff. It's like this, but I mean, I don't know. If you want me to put them in NY6, I'll do it for you. Like you said, because you let me put Indiana in almost bowl team. But I mean, if you look at everything I just said, it's top 25. But it's up to you.
I mean, Jeffrey, our biggest win is Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm.
And when we get to Notre Dame, which we'll get to them here in just a second, where we put Notre Dame is really going to determine how good that win really looks. So I'll say put us ahead of LSU. We're borderline. Just for the fact of the conference, the way the conference shook out, we can put us right there. Yeah, Maryland, they're a bowl team, pretty cut and dry.
Yeah, they made it 6-6, so that's definitely easy.
Cincinnati, put them in the dumpster, Jeffrey. Put them in the dumpster. No arguments here.
Yeah, they were bad. 3-9, 1-8. Very ugly season for Scott Satterfield, your old coach.
Emory Jones, he's not what everyone thinks he is. That was Cincinnati. They beat Pitt though in Pittsburgh. Make this make sense, Jeffrey. So does that mean Cincinnati, Notre Dame, and Louisville? How does that work?
The transitive property does not work. I don't buy it. No way.
Colorado. Okay, this one we might have some words on. Listen, I know I'm going to get roasted for this, but I want to put them in almost bowl again. I really do. But Jeffrey, see if you can talk me off the ledge. I know I'm going to get roasted, but go for it.
They had a better record than Indiana, 4-8, which I guess deserves some merit, but they went 1-8 in the Pac-12, which is bad. I mean, the season started well. I mean, they beat TCU. People thought they were great. Oh, my goodness, they beat TCU. But then it's like TCU wasn't that good. And then they were able to beat Nebraska, but Nebraska wasn't that good. And they beat Colorado State close. That was the game for me when I'm like, no, this is not good. This is not a good team. You barely beat Colorado State, and we saw the same wide receiver. You watched it. Everybody else watched it, too, because there were 10 million eyeballs on that game. The same wide receiver for Colorado State kept running this little crossing route across the field, and Colorado's defense did absolutely nothing to stop it. And I'm like, no way. Absolutely no way. Oh, boy, Jason, no. Jason, did Jeffrey stick Indiana to almost both teams, hoping no one would notice? I see that. Yes, Jason, I did. 3 losses by combined 10 points. Yes, almost bowl team. But Colorado just, to me, wasn't that good at all. I mean, they got blown out against Oregon, blown out against, a couple of Washington State. But, I mean, they were competitive against, teams like USC. So it's up to you, man.
Jeffrey, I'm going to fight for this. And I'm doing more fighting for Colorado than I did my own team. This is how much I love prime time. Jeffrey, like I said, like you just mentioned, they kept it close to USC, who at the time a lot of people thought could win the Pac-12 and go to the playoffs. I mean, and they beat TCU, the national runner-up at the time. I mean, we got to give primetime his respect. Tired of all this hating around here. Primetime's the GOAT, everybody. Get used to seeing his face. You're going to get to see it all the time.
I will say, though, going down Colorado's schedule a little further, though, they lost by 7 to Oregon State. They lost by 3 to Arizona. They lost by 6 to Utah. I mean, I don't know. I think I'll give it to them. Now, are they in front of or behind Indiana? What are we doing here? Because they went 4-8 a week. Well, fine. We'll give Colorado above Indiana. There you go, prime time. There you go. You're in front of Indiana.
Oh Lord.
Jason
Oh,
says Jeffrey was hoping I would miss this stream. Yo, you're good, Jason. Appreciate you for being here.
Jason, we gave Boston College their credit. As you see, Jeffrey is not a BC hater. He owned up to his mistakes like we all do. Don't you worry. Well, Miami, you know where they go, Jeffrey. Just put them in the bowl team. They're not top 25.
Yeah, that's easy. I mean, I love the 6-16. It's just so easy. Just throw them in there.
Michigan, put them at the top, Jeffrey. They're the kings of the sport. No arguments here. Unless you have a different opinion.
And we'll put them in front of Alabama where they belong, right there. Number 1, Michigan got it done for the first time since 1997, but it might come as a price because Jim Harbaugh, it looks like he might be leaving. He's interviewing all over the place with the NFL, so it might be one and done for Michigan for a while.
He might be gone. And then I believe the next team is Michigan State. Jeffrey, put them in dumpster fire. Any discussions?
I mean, I think the reason why they're more of a dumpster fire is not just necessarily of what they did, because they did go 4-8, which was better than Indiana, and they did beat Indiana, even though Indiana they really should have won that game, but it is what it is. Michigan State, it's more about what happened with the coach and just the disdain for the entire season. Like, it's just a big stain mark on Michigan State athletics, just how bad all that was. It wasn't just what they did on the field. It was more just off the field was a dumpster fire. So I think I'll put them ahead of Arizona State, Baylor, and Cincinnati because they got 4 wins. Those other teams got 3, but they were pretty bad, so, just with everything that happened.
Jeffrey, next up is Ole Miss. They were a team in New Year's 6, but did they play like it all the time?
I mean, maybe not all the time, but I will say, to give them an argument, is for one, they did make it. They finished 9th in the nation. They went 11-2, and like they dominated Penn State. And the thing that made that so impressive is there really were not a lot of opt-outs in that game. Like Penn State, I think, had a couple defenders, but for the most part, that was like one of the only big bowl games where there was not a lot of opt-outs. And Ole Miss just dominated in the game. They were able to knock off LSU. They beat Tulane. They lost to Alabama, yes, and Georgia, but that's expected. And they beat everybody else. I mean, there's an argument that they shouldn't be NY6 because, I mean, there was a couple games like the Arkansas game and the Auburn game where they barely won those games, but that was coming off the 2-game stretch with Bama LSU. So maybe they were a bit, hungover from those games. I mean, they made it. They finished in the top 10. They went 11-2 in the tough SEC. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, I'll give it to you, Jeffrey. I mean, you made a really compelling argument. I was going to put them ahead of Louisville, but since they made it, it kind of makes it hard to dispute it, and they won. So NY6 contender for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's not just that they won. They dominated. It was very, very impressive. I was one of the only ones that went Ole Miss because everybody went Penn State, and I went Ole Miss. And and this is their first 11-win season ever as well. That's another underrated thing. They never won 11 games as a program in their history. So that's awesome.
That's kind of shocking. But Jeffrey, I went Ole Miss like you did. And a lot of people were like, why are you picking Ole Miss? Versus James Franklin. I'm like, I don't know. Jackson Dart, Quinshon Junkins. I think that running game's going to get that Penn State defense. Now Quinshon Junkins is gone. So there goes that element.
Why did he leave? I know Ohio State NIL, but why did he leave? Because Ole Miss bringing in all these good players in the portal. Their defense is looking stacked. You got Dart coming back. I mean, Lane Kiffin isn't going anywhere. It's looking so good for Ole Miss. I even saw a power ranking that had them over Alabama right now for next season, and then he leaves. Why did you leave? It's insane. I think maybe he wants more of a spotlight at a bigger national brand and NIL maybe as well, but that's a tough loss for Ole Miss when everything was going their way, it looked like, so far in the offseason. But for last season, being NY6 contender, they were fantastic making that and beating Penn State.
Mississippi State, they weren't technically a dumpster fire. They did go 5-7, but at times they looked not so great. But then there was times where they did beat Arizona. If you look at their schedule, they did beat Arizona. That is a great win. Like Jeffrey,
That's the game I was talking about when referencing Arizona lost an early game. The game wasn't coming to my mind, but that was it. Mississippi State is not an awful team, but see, Arizona didn't have Fafita yet. Delora played in that game. And like if Fafita plays, is Mississippi State winning that game? More than likely not. It's still an impressive win, and it's one of those, as they say, that aged well, because as the season went on, Arizona did so well, it made Mississippi State look better. But the whole story is that Arizona wasn't what they were yet because they didn't have Fafita. Also, Mississippi State beat Arkansas. But other than that, they didn't beat anybody else in the SEC. All their other wins are against bad teams. They were competitive against South Carolina. They technically were competitive against Ole Miss. I mean, probably the Arizona win and the fact they went 5-7 keeps them out of dumpster fire, I guess. Plus, it was, a first-year head coach and Zach Arnett that they fired. He only got 1 year. I mean, that wasn't a good look. But, I mean, I guess they're almost bowl.
Yeah, they're almost bowl team on a technicality, I guess. You could put them there. Okay, now how do we want to approach this one? Minnesota. They got in off smarts. Let's be honest.
Here's the other thing. That not only did they get in because of smarts, they got in because of the Cooper DeJean play. Because Minnesota should have been 4-8. They should have been 4-8. But I mean,
you get tricked, Jeffrey. If Cooper DeJean, if they didn't rig that rule or whatever you want to look at it, Minnesota could be 4-8, and we could be talking about Iowa could have been in the playoff conversation. Crazy enough, but that's another. We're past Iowa now. We're on Minnesota. I mean, Jeffrey, they did make a bowl and they did win, but it's a tainted one.
It's so unfair because they made a bowl and they won the bowl, and it's like, okay, that's enough to put them in bowl team. But like I said, 5-7, bad. And they should have been 4-8 because of the Cooper DeJean play. I mean, him waving his arms around and a little bit, and they count that as a fair catch because he scored and Iowa should have won. It is what it is. I mean, the rule is bowl teams. The category, we didn't put bowl caliber teams. Because, see, if we put bowl caliber teams, then no, Minnesota's not a bowl caliber team. But since the category is bowl teams, they made a bowl. So I guess they should be there. But they are the worst bowl team, even over BC, because they did not win 6 games. And Minnesota should have been 4-8. I still think Minnesota's better than Boston College, by the way. But because they should have been 4-8, they didn't deserve to be in a bowl, but they got in anyway, and they won. So
yeah, Jeffrey, we'll just say they got in on a big technicality. Missouri, oh boy, the biggest one we whiffed of on the all. We put them in dumpster fire in our preseason prediction. Jeffrey, this is one that I think me and you. This is the one that bit us in the hiney the most. Well, and since they won 11 games and they were in the NY6, they belong in the NY6 contender category. Because if we're going to treat them like we did Ole Miss, it's only fair.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I'm with you because they beat Ohio State. The only problem is that Ohio State has all those opt-outs, and so it's not as impressive of a win, but they did win, and you still got to give them credit. And plus, they knocked off Kansas State, they knocked off Tennessee, they blitzed Tennessee. I'll tell you, they no knock it off. They blitzed Tennessee, absolutely destroyed them, and they also were able to knock off South Carolina in big fashion. They knocked off Arkansas in big fashion. They did lose to Georgia, but it was competitive, and LSU. I think they are NY6.
Yeah, I agree, Jeffrey, NY6 contender. And, Jeffrey, that's one of those we put in dumpster fire. That's one of our bad beats, so to speak. The Jeffrey and Austin bad beats.
Yeah,
that's going to be a new
worst one, definitely by far.
But they are NY16. team, though. Nebraska almost bowl.
I mean, they collapsed down the stretch. They were 5-3, and they lost their last 4 games. And how do you do that? I mean, in the Big Ten West as well. I mean, they're not a dumpster fire because Matt Rule's still there. He's not getting fired or anything like that. And they did show improvement this season, but the way they ended the year was just embarrassing. Should have made a bowl, but they definitely are an almost bowl team.
Yeah, I was about to say, Jeffrey, they're not a dumpster fire. They went 5-7, and realistically, they should have been 8-4. If you look at it, some of the games that they lost the way they did, they should technically be 7-5, 8-4, but they're not a dumpster fire. North Carolina is our next team. This one's interesting, Jeffrey, because they did make a bowl, but they were top 25 for most of the year. But then they had to collapse because the defense did North Carolina defense things. They just decided, we'll show up the first couple weeks, and then against Virginia and Georgia Tech, we're just going to collapse altogether. And it's like you almost come to expect this from North Carolina. Jeffrey, did they finish ranked at least? Maybe we can still salvage some of their season. Argument.
They didn't finish ranked after the bowl game, but they weren't ranked either before the bowl game, right? When they were 8-4 and they faced West Virginia in the Duke's Mayo Bowl, they were not ranked either. So, yeah, I mean, the thing is that it's kind of like with Duke and Kansas. Like, for most of the year, they were top 25. Kansas was basically top 25, but the injuries and how they perform a little bit at times is kind of keeping them out. Duke, they were injured to Riley Leonard. North Carolina, the defense collapsed. I mean, at the beginning of the year, we saw how they played against South Carolina. I know South Carolina didn't end up being that good, but North Carolina had like 9 sacks in that game. It was so impressive. And then they beat Minnesota, which, ended up not being that great. But North Carolina won at Pitt, which at the time was like, hey, no one wins at Pitt when you're ranked. Carolina, on paper, was a top 25 team. They're probably one of the most talented teams that didn't finish in the top 25. They had a lot of talent, especially on offense, and they even had some good defensive players, but not enough all over the defense. I don't like doing it because I like the Tar Heels, but I will put them in bowl team. It's just they didn't finish ranked. They finished poorly. They lost the bowl game in embarrassing fashion, even though we know why with the opt-outs. It is what it is, but they should have been a top 25. The defense was better. They didn't collapse down the stretch like they always do.
Jeffrey, one more thing. You can't lose Virginia at home.
And you can't lose to Virginia at home. Yeah, that's right. Carolina, you lost your top 25 privileges after that.
Here's the thing. Georgia Tech on the road. Georgia Tech ended up being better, so it's like, okay, they ended up in the bowl tier. But Virginia, spoiler alert, they're probably going to be in the dumpster fire when we get there. But you lost your privilege after that. Like a kid who did something bad at school. You lost your TV for a week. North Carolina, you lost your privilege for a while. NC State, though, Jeffrey, they were a team that a lot of people, including you, after we beat them 13-10, people were like, NC State's not really a good team. Louisville had to slug it out. And then it was like, then they came on late down the stretch, and I kept preaching to the choir. I'm like, does that NC State win look good now? Does it look good now to you people? And then, Jeffrey, you eventually came around later and was like, okay, maybe I judged too quick on that. Because Dave Doran, he seems to always do this, Jeffrey. Like a lot of team people had them maybe going to the ACC championship game. Some people had it spicy, but I will say, did they finish ranked? That will help a lot as well, because they really
didn't finish ranked at number 21. They were 9-4, 6-2 in the ACC. There's arguments both ways. I will say arguments against NC State is, for one thing, it's the ACC, so it is weaker. And we did put Kansas in bowl team when there's an argument Kansas is better than NC State. And they lost to Duke without Riley Leonard, 24-3. That was a bad loss. I don't know what happened in that game. NC State losing to Duke like that without Leonard. But positives is that they beat North Carolina, which Carolina struggled down the stretch, but it was still a good win. They did knock off Virginia Tech on the road when Virginia Tech was surging. They beat Miami. They beat Clemson. So there's good on there. And they hung with Louisville. The Notre Dame loss was bad. It's 50-50. I mean, I feel like Kansas and NC State, it's like right there. I mean, there's an argument. They finished top 25, so did Kansas. But, I mean, NC State at times didn't look top 25 either. But I don't know.
Jeffrey, if you want to put them ahead of North Carolina, we can. Just to split the difference. I would put them in top 25 personally myself, but the facts that you presented, we can maybe slide them in ahead of North Carolina. Northwestern, they were the surprise of everybody. And Northwestern, that they probably didn't finish ranked, but they were definitely a bowl team, though. Jeffrey, we owe this team a big time apology, which I've apologized over and over to this team again. I mean, what a credible job David Braun has done. Not to gush over him too long because we still got a lot of teams to get to, but what an incredible job he has done. All props to him. But like you said, though, Jeffrey, on your live streams with Will and D, is can Northwestern keep this going? Was this just a byproduct of divisions? And unfortunately, Jeffrey, that might be the case. Like, I love stories like this. This is so cool. Like, they're the underdog. No one thought they could win more than maybe 2 games. But they won 8 games in his first season after everything that went on. But now that we're going divisionless, unfortunately, it may be back to 3-4 wins. Back to the dumpster. But for at least this year, you could put them in bowl team. Maybe even put them ahead of Maryland.
Yeah, I would put them probably around the Iowa State, Kentucky round. I'll put them ahead of Kentucky because they won 8 games. Kentucky won 7. And behind Duke, who also won 8. I mean, the thing is I'm with you. I'm very impressed with David Brown. It's so impressive, him coming in after the Pat Fitzgerald situation. And it was so messed up. Like, it was so hilarious watching people talking about Northwestern. They were like, oh, they're going to win 2-3 games. They're going to be horrible. Maybe they'll even win 1. And that's it. But the issue is that, like you said, the West was bad. And now that the Big Ten, you're adding all these teams, there's no divisions, I worry for him because now that he's won 8 games, this is the expectation. Now I think we're going to, be able to win 7-8 games next year. It's like, I don't know about that. It's going to be very difficult to do that. Very impressive this season, but I mean, would they have beaten Utah with Cam Rising? No. No way. Absolutely no way that's happening. And they won the bowl game, but Cam Rising was out, so it is what it is. I just think that, I don't know. I believe that Northwestern, this probably might be one of their only seasons that they're going to be this good right now for the foreseeable future. We'll see. I'm not saying it's set in stone. Maybe he can continue. Maybe he could surprise. He seems to have a lot of energy, but it's just going to be very tough to lead Northwestern to a lot of wins in the future right now with the Big Ten. Will's not happy about NC State and Kansas. He said Kansas was ranked. We did mention that there were, some technicalities. Yeah, they finished ranked, but they didn't look top 25 at times. And, the injury, especially with Jalen Daniels, that's why, like with Duke, we were going to put Duke in the top 25, but then the injury, I don't know. Kansas is the one I was most arguing for, but it's borderline. It's very close. But they are definitely the best of the bowl teams.
Yeah, and plus, Jeffrey, we still got quite a few teams, and I already see a couple that there's going to be some heavy arguments for top 25. So we try not to water it down. And speaking of one of them, here it is, Will. Your favorite team, Notre Dame.
Notre Dame top 25 for sure, but they didn't make New Year's 6. I know there's going to be an argument from Will, but they finished 14th. They were 10-3, and the 2 teams that we put in NY6, Missouri and Ole Miss, they only had 2 losses. I believe Notre Dame is top 25, probably.
Yeah, Jeffrey, and I'm sure the way Will likes the way you placed them behind LSU. Like, he probably doesn't care about Louisville because they did lose. They did lose to us, so he may not have too much of a problem. But that LSU one, here in a minute, he may have a big issue with you doing that. So,
yeah, Will says Notre Dame should have made NY6 out of Penn State, but Penn State had 2 losses, Will. Notre Dame had 3. That's the problem. And then he says, I'm going to barf. I know, Brian Kelly, but I mean, realistically, LSU had the Heisman quarterback. I mean, come on. It's kind of tough to put Notre Dame ahead of them.
See, Jeffrey,
And they beat up on a whimpering Oregon State team that was limping into that bowl game. All the transfers, the coach is gone, the running back can't play. I mean, Notre Dame, they flexed in the bowl, but Oregon State was in a bad situation. Will says they lost to the only two good teams they play. I know, but Notre Dame lost to Louisville, man. I know that the hard stretch, and they lost to Clemson. I mean, Notre Dame not NY6. They're close, which is why they're ahead of Clemson. I mean, technically, you can make an argument that they should be behind Clemson, but Clemson is 4 losses, Notre Dame is 3. That's why I have them ahead.
Yeah, and Will, thank you very much. We finished second in the ACC, so therefore we were seen by technicality, okay? Thank you very much. Will, next, we're going to come to South Bend next year and give you a lesson there, too, if we can.
I'm
Probably
staying
not.
out of that. I'm staying out of that right there.
Actually, I'm dreading that game. We're going to get our butts spanked.
I can't wait. Oh, boy. I'm sure you can't, man. It's like Jackson said earlier tonight. Don't know if Jackson's still here, but appreciate you for being here earlier, Jackson. But like he said, I think we're 220 days away from the college football season, if I can remember, as what he said earlier. So you guys have a little ways to go, but definitely you guys will have a lot to look forward to next season, especially with that game. It's going to be a lot of fun.
But to carry on with business, though, Jeffrey, what's our next team?
Yeah, our next team, we got Ohio State. I mean, that's tough because of the fact that, I mean, I think that they were in the conversation, right, for the playoff. I mean, they were very close, but they lost to Missouri, but the opt-outs is why. But, I mean, it's kind of like with Alabama and Georgia. Georgia lost to Bama. They didn't make the playoff. But Ohio State, they lost to Michigan. It was a one-score game, and they won all their other games. They were this close. I mean, they technically were a contender, even though no one thought they were going to make it after that loss to Michigan.
Yeah, Jeffrey, I would say you could put them either ahead of Ole Miss or you could put them in the contender. I'll leave it up to you. How we've been judging this tonight, we've been very gracious, but if you want to be harsh on Ohio State and just put them ahead of Ole Miss, we can. I'll leave it up to you.
Yeah, Jason, he points out a technicality here real quick. He says, shouldn't Maryland be first or second in the bowl teams category? How are they behind Auburn? Great point. We will rectify that right now. Maryland is ahead of Auburn. They won. I've been trying to do a good job of ranking them in order, but we missed that. Maryland above Auburn, above BC. They deserve it. You're absolutely right. Will says put Ohio State behind Missouri. I mean, the issue is that game, though, Ohio State didn't have their full team. And that they were a contender till the end, right? It's just, that's the thing. I mean, if you're basing it off of the fact that Ohio State was a contender to the end and they barely lost to the team that won the whole thing. I mean, Michigan won the entire thing and Ohio State lost by 6. Like, they were that close. But then if you look at the argument, well, they lost to Missouri in the New Year's Six game, which that's Ohio State's fault for running Colin McCord out of town. And then Devin Brown got injured, and then that was it. Marvin Harrison didn't play and all that. But to me, they were a contender. But based off what they did in the New Year's Six game, they should be behind Missouri. I guess, to be fair, they did lose to Missouri. We'll put them there. But, I mean, that's going off more of the fact, again, the transitive property, which isn't exactly fair because Ohio State didn't have their whole team. I think they were CFP contender, but it is what it is. Ohio State, they lost. They didn't make it. And then they got beat by Missouri because they chose not to have Colin McCord out there.
Yeah, Jeffrey, I'm with you. I really believe you could put them behind Georgia. I'm really in favor, like you are, putting them there. But we're looking at it the way that we've been doing it all night long. We've been putting the teams that, if these teams did playing, we've been putting them behind the teams. So I guess by technicality, we have to put them behind Missouri and NY6 contender if we're going to be fair and not great on a curve, as they say.
I completely agree with you. They are a CFP contender, but by technicality, we got the Buckeyes and NY6 behind Missouri. Now we got Oklahoma. I mean, I think this was easy. I mean, top
5.
25.
I'm with you, Jeffrey. Sorry to cut you off. Top 25.
Mm-hmm. I mean, they went 10-3, 7-2, and they were ranked 15th at the end of the season. They didn't make the New Year's Six, but clearly they were a top 25 team this year. They had some hiccups, but they were a very solid team. We'll put them behind Arizona since they lost.
Oklahoma State.
Man, this is a team that looks so good at times this season, but also looks so bad at times this season. The loss to South Alabama, the loss to UCF, but then they beat Oklahoma, and they had other good wins as well. Didn't they knock off Kansas State too?
Yeah, I believe they did. I believe. Jeffrey, they are a top 25. Are we willing to push the borders of NY6 contenders since they made the Big 12 championship game? And they did get blitzed by Texas. We acknowledge that. But are we going to put them on that borderline? Like, NY6, because if they would have won, they would have had to have given them a spot possibly. What do you think, Jeffrey?
I mean, I feel like if they were more competitive against Texas and they didn't have those two losses to South Alabama and UCF that were bad, then yes. But since they lost those two games, because, I mean, they lost to UCF 45-3, and I know it was after the Oklahoma game. Classic hangover. But they didn't barely lose. They got destroyed, and then they got beat badly against Texas too. I mean, they were really good, but I do think that they should be in just top 25.
Yeah, they're a top 25 team in my opinion too. I was like, maybe we could stretch it, but like you said, that's South Alabama, and then get trounced by UCF, who's down there really low on our bowl teams. That really drags them down. But they're top 25 for sure.
Mm-hmm. Oregon's up next.
NY6 team.
I agree. Definitely. I mean, they had a good year. And the thing is, I believe Oregon was probably better than Washington on paper. I still believe that. I think that their team was better than Washington's, but they didn't win. They didn't win either time. Michael Penix slinging it out there, got it done. Very good team Oregon was, but they lost two games. They weren't in contention for the CFP at the end because of those two losses, and they blitzed, Liberty in the bowl game. So, I mean, that gives them credit there. So, and they finished higher in the rankings than Ole Miss, Missouri, and Ohio State, I believe. I think, okay, to look, Missouri finished in the AP poll 8th, and Ole Miss finished 9th. Oregon finished 6th. So that's why I have Oregon ahead of the other teams in the NY6. I think that's fair.
Yeah, and Tim is in the chat. He's crusading against Oregon. Tim, they went to the NY6. I get it, but he's like, coaching guys. Oregon had better players but worse coaching, so not the better team.
But what I'm saying by the better team, Tim, is I'm basing it just off the players. I'm saying Oregon was the better team than Washington because of the players, not the coaches. Yes, the coaches, Washington's were better. That's why Washington won the games. They found a way to win, and Penix was awesome in those two games. I'm completely with you there. Oregon was the better team than Washington on the players, but coaching, Washington was better, and that ruled at the end of the day. I completely agree with you.
Yeah, but Jeffrey, Oregon was one that we nailed.
Mm-hmm.
Nailed. Happy we got that one on the money. Oregon State's up next. Technically, they made a bowl, but they were a dumpster fire. Like, towards the end there. Like, the way the things ended for them. Like, I know we can't do that, but, boy, they would definitely be one. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
This one's frustrating because there's such a wide range of outcomes that you could say they should have been a top 25 team. They were all year. I mean, they were a solid team. Yeah, they had some hiccups. They weren't perfect, but DJ Uiagalelei, for the most part, was what Oregon State fans were hoping for. He didn't turn the ball over too much. He was pretty solid. They had a good run game. Their defense was fairly stout. And things were looking really good at first. And then they lost to Washington State, which that loss didn't age well at all. But they were able to beat Utah. They beat UCLA. Then they lost to Arizona, which that loss aged a lot better because Arizona was really good. But then that Washington game, they played so hard in that game in the rain. Both of these teams, gave it everything they had, and Washington was this close to losing. And Washington couldn't pass the ball well because it was raining, but Oregon State still fell short. Then they got destroyed against Oregon, but then in the bowl game, they got beat horribly by Notre Dame because all the players, I know Will's saying top 25, but they didn't finish in the top 25. They should be in the top 25. They should have been, on paper, they were a top 25 team. Coaching-wise with Jonathan Smith, they were a top 25 team this season, but they didn't end in the top 25. And now their program is just in bad shape because you're talking about now Oregon State's not a part of the Power Four. They didn't get a Big 12 invite. They're not going to be playing Mount West schools. Jonathan Smith's gone. DJ's gone. A lot of the team's gone. It's ugly. So, they should be, just like with Duke, just like Carolina, Kansas, they should have been a top 25 team, but they didn't finish like it. So, I think bowl team.
Yeah, I agree, bowl team. Next up, we got Penn State, Jeffrey. We put them in CFB contender. That wasn't as bad as a pick as Clemson was, but in my opinion, they're either top 25 or they're in the NY6 contender. But since they made it, we kind of have to put them there.
The issue is they made it, yes. They made it, but they lost kind of embarrassingly. It wasn't horrible, but it was still a pretty bad loss. And they finished below, I believe, LSU in the rankings, I think. What did LSU finish? Penn State finished 13 in the rankings, and LSU finished 12th. And we put LSU in top 25. But again, Penn State made it. So, by technicality, they should be NY6. To be fair, to Will's point, since NC State and Kansas finished in the top 25, we could kind of put them there, but we're also basing off top 25 teams. I think as we get to the end here, if we don't have enough in the top 25 category for 25 teams ranked, we can maybe move them there. But I think that, again, with the case of Penn State, it's whether you take the approach of that, yes, they made it, but were they that good? I guess since they made it, we'll put them there if that's what you want to do. But, they just weren't that impressive, but they made it.
Yeah, Jeffrey, I'm with you. By technicality, we got to put them there since they went 10-2, technically 10-3, but they did lose in bad fashion. So they are NY6 and they are behind Ohio State since they did not beat them. We're keeping our record straight here. This next one, Jeffrey, is going to be very interesting. You've got Pitt. What in the world do we do with them? Because I know they didn't make a bowl, but they're between dumpster fire and almost bowl. If we're giving Indiana a grace of a pass, I guess we need to do that for Pitt too, correct? They did end up beating a team that we do have in the top 25, unfortunately. I'm crying inside right now, but it's okay. We'll pull it together. But Pitt's very interesting. Jeffrey, do we back Pat Narduzzi and just give him the benefit of the doubt and maybe slide him ahead of Arkansas? Or not that good?
The problem is that Pitt finished 3-9, like Indiana. But looking at their schedule, yeah, they beat Louisville. That was the big win. And we know, obviously, Louisville's coming off the Notre Dame win. So, bad, hangover game. They barely lost to Cincinnati, but Cincinnati was bad. They barely lost to Wake, but Wake was bad. They beat Boston College, bowl team. Lost to Duke by 11. It's close. It's just, I feel like with such an experienced coach with Narduzzi, and I know they've lost so much talent because, like Tim, he says Narduzzi can play not tampering yet this offseason. That's funny. Annual event with that guy. But, the thing is, him being there so long and them doing that bad, that was pretty poor.
Jeffrey, I don't want to do it to him, though. But if you feel like that Louisville win was not enough to save it, we could put him in dumpster fire. I don't want to do it to the old guy because he had been so consistent, almost like Mike Tomlin for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Just been so consistent for Pittsburgh. You always knew they were going to make a bowl, at least, maybe even compete a couple years. But if you want to put them in dumpster fire / trash, we can. But they're the best trash team.
It's close. I mean, the win over Louisville, it's tempting because that was impressive. But, I mean, Louisville played very bad in that game. I don't know. It's just with a guy like Narduzzi, he should have done better. I guess I'll give it to you. I'll give them the worst almost bowl team. I mean, they had a couple close losses, but they still were pretty awful. They weren't very good.
I mean, if you feel like they're a dumpster fire, Jeffrey, put them there. I just think Pat Narduzzi has earned a lot of credit. I think he's earned a lot of respect from me. I don't know if you feel that way with some of those coaches. I don't know. But in my case, he's earned some of that trust because he's been so consistent.
I'll give it to you. I'll give Pitt as the worst almost bowl team. They were bad, but the Louisville win and Narduzzi, we'll put them there. Purdue. Now, Purdue, they finished 4-8. So, I mean, that's like borderline. And, I mean, it was Ryan Walters' first season, as the coach. So, I mean, you got to give him a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. But, I mean, looking at their schedule, they went, like I said, 4-8, and they went 3-6 in Big Ten play. They lost in the non-conference to Fresno State and Syracuse, but they beat Virginia Tech, which that was a bowl team. They beat Illinois. They beat Indiana. They beat Minnesota. They got destroyed against Nebraska, ironically, and Michigan and Ohio State. That's not surprising, and Wisconsin, but they were competitive against Iowa and Northwestern. I mean,
Yeah. Where are you leaning, Jeffrey? Me personally, I might have them a little ahead of Indiana, but not by much.
Yeah, I guess that's fine. I mean, they are in the West, which is easier. I mean, that helps them out. The East is harder than the West, but they did beat Indiana, and they had some moments. So I guess we'll put them in almost bowl team ahead of Indiana. Now, Rutgers, they're bowl team. That's clear for sure. No argument.
Now, Jeffrey, where are we putting them? Do you want to say ahead of? Okay, we're getting a little dicey. You think they should go ahead of Maryland?
Now, my memory, if serves me correct, let me look at the schedule. Maryland and Rutgers played. So that's going to be a big key factor there. Maryland and Rutgers. Maryland beat Rutgers. And Maryland finished 8-5. Rutgers finished 7-6. So we'll go with Maryland over Rutgers.
Our next team is the South Carolina Gamecocks. Jeffrey, this is another interesting one because they were a team that had a lot of preseason hype. I believe they weren't ranked, I don't think. When we
were right outside the top 25. They were right outside because North Carolina was ranked like 21st or something like that. And South Carolina was like 28th in the other receiving votes.
So this is interesting. So Jeffrey, all preseason hype, we had this team in top 25. This was another one of our blunders that we're gonna fix now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for me, I don't think they were a dumpster fire because if you look, they only lost to Georgia by 10, which for Carolina standard, that's not that bad. I would say almost bowl, but the question is, how far up do you want to take them up that ladder, so to speak?
Yeah, they were 5-7, 3-5 in the SEC. So I mean, they were only one win away from making the bowl game. Yeah, the North Carolina loss, that was bad. I mean, them losing the way they did, letting North Carolina's defense actually look legit was not a pretty sight. But like you said, they hung with Georgia. They beat Mississippi State. They beat Kentucky. That was a solid win. Beat Vanderbilt. They hung with Florida. Had a shot to win that game. Hung kind of with Clemson a little bit. I guess we'll put them behind Florida because of the fact Florida beat them.
Next up is USC, which is Tim Prangley's favorite team in the chat, everybody. Love that guy to death, but I know he's not going to like where we put USC. Jeffrey, USC belongs in bowl team. I'm sorry, Tim.
They didn't finish in the top 25. They just, no.
Love you to death, Tim, but we got to be real here. Yes, your win over us was great, but still, yeah, there's a lot more bad than there is good for you too. There's enough to go around. Everybody needs to eat pie.
I mean, USC, the way that they finished, beating Louisville, I mean, that was really impressive with Miller Moss. I mean, Louisville was a ranked team, but I mean, USC has that loss to UCLA. That was very ugly. I mean, unfortunately, USC did not play Oregon State. So, I mean, that's a little bit frustrating because, I mean, Oregon State, for the most of the season, probably looked better than USC, but the way Oregon State ended was ugly. I guess we'll move USC ahead of Oregon State.
I guess we'll give him that. We'll give him that. But no, you're not moving in the top 25, Tim. Stop asking.
I know, right above Louisville. That's funny. I mean, they have to be kind of on the same level, and unfortunately, USC was 8-5, Louisville 10-4. It's kind of hard there, but that's funny.
Tim, stop asking about going in the top 25. It's not happening. Put that down, okay? On to our next team, Jeffrey. Oh, the tree.
Stanford and dumpster fire.
Jeffrey, air high five. We got that one right. I will say.
I mean, I know they beat Colorado, and that receiver had a career day with like 300 receiving yards, but still, I mean, Stanford wasn't that good.
Technically, if we want to be technical, Colorado should be 5-7, but they blew a 29-point lead. So technically, Colorado should be 5-7 and going almost bowling. But
that was a very entertaining game, just like West Virginia, Houston.
It was. I mean, for sure. But hopefully for Stanford, there's better days. But unfortunately for them, it's dumpster fire. Syracuse, whole team. Our next team, Syracuse, whole team. Not much else to say. They kind of backdoored their way in. Let's be honest. Jeffrey, you could put them maybe behind Georgia Tech. I don't know about Minnesota. Minnesota's the worst because they got smarts. At least Syracuse won their games.
Yeah, Syracuse, I mean, it's bad. It's so bad. I don't know. Like, they made a bowl, but losing the way they did to South Florida, they got to go at the end of the bowl team list. Will and D saying put Stanford ahead of Colorado. I understand, Will. I do, but Colorado won 4 games. Stanford won 3. And didn't Stanford lose to Sacramento State, where the coach came from, Troy Taylor? Troy Taylor came from Sacramento State, and Stanford lost to them. That's bad. That is really bad.
Will, you know better than that. Colorado is better than Stanford. I'm going to stand on this. Just head-to-heads don't always matter. I'm stealing one from Jeffrey. Head-to-heads don't always matter. So
yeah, I was about to say, that sounds exactly what I would say.
If that's the case, Will, that means we're better than Notre Dame because we beat you, right? That's the logic you want to lose.
No, Notre Dame's better. See, Will, it don't always work.
Exactly, Will. I acknowledge Notre Dame's the better team. Not to get too sidetracked here because we still got plenty more teams to talk about. But the logic you're using is not correct, good buddy. Good buddy, old pal, friend. We're using the Jeffrey logic. Head-to-head don't always mean everything. What if Indiana beats Penn State? Does that mean Indiana's better than Penn State? No.
It does not.
But, okay, back to our regularly scheduled program. Sorry for the rant, everybody. Tennessee, Jeffrey, top 25.
I mean, I know Will doesn't want it, but they finished 17. They went 9-4, and they blitzed Iowa. They blitzed the top 25 team. I mean, there's some negatives, though. I mean, the Missouri loss was bad. I mean, they got absolutely destroyed in that game, and they also lost to Florida, who didn't even make a bowl game. So it's not all roses for the Volunteers. But They did blow out Virginia, who North Carolina lost to, so that's kind of impressive. Virginia wasn't that good, but they destroyed them. They beat A&M. They beat Kentucky. They beat Vanderbilt. I mean, there's not a lot there, and they did get destroyed by Georgia and Missouri. Alabama, they were somewhat competitive with. I mean, it's tough because at times they were not a top 25 looking team, but they finished 17, and the Iowa win was impressive. So I guess we got to put Tennessee at the bottom of the bowl team or a top 25 team.
Now, Jeffrey. Now, another technicality, Jeffrey. We got to move them ahead of Iowa. We got to try to stay true the best we can. People are
right. I'll give him that. I think Tennessee's better than Iowa. That's fair because Iowa's in the West. That offense is so bad. At least Tennessee, neither side of the ball was as bad as Iowa's offense, so that's fair. And they won, so we'll give them that.
Yes, we'll give you your credit, Tennessee. But on to the next team, Texas CFB contender, no arguments. I'm in agreement with you there, Jeffrey. Now, the question is, where do you want to put them? Because we still have Washington yet to come. Are you wanting to put them ahead of Alabama?
I believe Alabama was the better team, but Texas did beat them, so that's fine. We'll put Texas ahead of them.
Okay. Texas A&M. I would say, Jeffrey, put them in bowl team, but they almost beat Alabama too, and I would say they're maybe ahead of. I don't know. What do you think, Jeffrey?
They finished 7-6, and they went 4-4 in SEC play, so they're definitely not top 25. But they had their moments. I mean, this wasn't a completely abysmal team. I mean, the issue is that obviously they, have all the talent in the world and they underperform. But still making a bowl, went 7-5 regular season. They lost to Oklahoma State in the bowl, lost to LSU, lost to Ole Miss. That was a close game, though. Lost to Tennessee close, lost to Bama close, and they lost to Miami. Like, all their losses are close. So that's impressive. They went 7-6, so we'll definitely put them ahead of most of the other teams that were like the 6-16. We'll put them ahead of them. I mean, like Northwestern got 8 wins, but A&M's probably better than Northwestern. But they're somewhere in here.
Wherever you feel like you want to put them, Jeffrey, put them right there if you feel like that's right.
I guess we'll put them there. I mean, they're better than Northwestern. They're probably better than Duke, Carolina too, but I mean, Carolina and Duke won 8 games, and they had their moments. They had talent with Drake May, Duke, Riley Leonard. A&M, I mean, they have talent too, but I mean, they had some issues. I think that's about right. That sounds good to me.
Yeah, Texas Tech, they're a bowl team, but they're a very disappointing bowl team. They had a lot of expectations, for sure. I mean, Jeffrey, a lot of people picked them as the dark horse to win the Big 12. Some people were very high on this team, but they're a bowl team. I don't think you can make an argument for top 25 unless you want to count their loss to Oregon, be like, oh, they almost beat Oregon. We have an NY6, but I don't think that's how that works.
No, they went 7-6, 5-4. I mean, they're definitely bowl team, and I don't think there's any argument for any higher than that. Well, now, I'm going to look real quick. Did they face Iowa State? Look real quick, because I know, like, with the new Big 12 schedule, not everybody played. I'm trying to remember. They did not. So that's kind of tough. Both of them went 7-6. I guess we'll put Tech ahead of Iowa State because they won their bowl game and Iowa State lost it. Jason says he picked Northwestern over A&M. My argument for A&M, though, is could Northwestern lose by 6 to Alabama? I don't think so. I mean, I don't think so. I know most of these teams in bowls wouldn't, but A&M lost by 6 to Alabama. It's just A&M's better than Northwestern. I know Northwestern won 8 games. It's tough. It's a technicality, but I had to put A&M somewhere. I feel like they're clearly better than Northwestern.
TCU, they're almost a bowl team, I think.
Yeah.
I think I have to put them there because they were legit 5-7, I do believe. They are the epitome of almost bowl team. There's no other.
Northwestern would be A&M. I'm sorry to interrupt, Austin. Come on. I mean, Yeah, they could maybe 2 or 3 out of 10 times, but A&M would win 7 or 8 out of 10 times. I don't like using that logic because
Well,
we know Northwestern could win. Yeah, A&M wouldn't try their best, but if they did, they're better. A&M's a better team, but you're saying if they treat like Auburn did against Maryland. Auburn did not treat Maryland at all whatsoever like they cared about that game, whereas Auburn gave Alabama everything they had. So I know what you mean. South Florida played hard because Milroe wasn't in, and Auburn gave everything they got because they're rivals, and they always play it close. So, I mean, there's technicalities there. We know that some teams play better than other teams do versus other teams. Auburn didn't play hard against Maryland and Mexico State. They did against Bama, and A&M always gives it their best against Alabama, but other teams they don't. A&M's a better team than Northwestern. Maybe Northwestern would win if A&M didn't try. That's the point.
Jeffrey, this is Vanderbilt, Texas A&M all over.
I know,
again.
it's the same thing. A&M's better than Vandy, but if A&M didn't try, Vandy could win.
Yes, but to TCU though, because we're almost done here. But TCU, they are the epitome of almost bowl. They went 5-7. I don't think there's any arguments. But the question is, where are we putting them in almost bowl? Do you want to say that they were better than South Carolina? Well, if we use our logic, Jeffrey, we can't put them ahead of Colorado.
Yeah, I know, but Colorado went 4-8, TCU went 5-7, and Colorado got worse as the season went along. TCU, I mean, they were up and down, like they had their moments. Look at their schedule real quick. I mean, it wasn't all bad for TCU. Like I know, like the regression from last year, it was awful, but they beat Houston, they beat SMU, that's decent. Close loss to West Virginia, close loss to Texas Tech. They beat Baylor. They almost beat Texas. They lost to Texas 29-26. Yeah, I think TCU probably right there. I think that's about above Nebraska.
Yeah, I think that's fair, Jeffrey. We can make an exception for this. And Jason O in the chat is really arguing against our Auburn selection here. Oh, boy.
Yeah, it's funny. I know Auburn's bad. I get it. But they have talent, and when they want to play right, they hung with Georgia. They hung with Bama. Against everybody else, they didn't care. They didn't try. We know. But it is what it is. Tim says, good night, guys. Word of the morning. Great show. Appreciate you for being here, Tim. Always fun having you in chat. Always love your thoughts and appreciate it. And hopefully you have a great day. Appreciate it.
You too as well, Tim. And our next team, Jeffrey, is, I believe, the Utah Utes. Yes, they are. Now, Jeffrey, this is one that we may have a bit of a rumble with because not me and you, but the fact of they were top 25 most of the season, even without Cam Rising, but they did not finish like it. How do we want to do it?
The problem is it's like Duke with the Riley Leonard situation. If Utah was healthy and had their entire team, because it wasn't just Cam Rising, they had other guys that were out too. Brent Keithy didn't play. Some defensive guys were injured. It was tough all season. So if they were healthy and had their entire team, there's no way they're not finishing top 25. They were a top 25 team when healthy, but they went 8-5. They lost to Northwestern in the bowl game. So I just don't think we can really put them there. And I guess we'll give Northwestern the credit since they won. Utah is a top 25 team, though. I want to put them there, but they didn't finish like it. So that's, I guess, where we got to go.
I will say, Jeffrey, we're running a little thin down there. We still don't have top 25 teams. We are being very strict, I think. Maybe like that teacher that doesn't grade on a curve. We're like trying to get the minute. We may have to fix some of this, but that's okay, though.
Yeah, right now in our top for the CFP contenders, NY6 and top 25, which would all be top 25, we got 5, 10. We got 20. So if we're going to do this right, we have to have at least 25 teams all in the top 25 and above. So we got 20 right now. So we have to have 5 more for it to make sense. And I'm not seeing a lot of teams here, so we'll see. We might have to move a couple more like Kansas up to top 25. We'll have to see. But UCLA is definitely not one of those teams in the top 25. They went 8-5, 4-5. They might have had a shot if they didn't lose to Cal. That ruined it for them.
Yeah, Jeffrey, I'm with you. They're a bowl team, in my opinion. They're just a bowl team.
Yeah, they
Okay,
probably have to go ahead of USC though because they beat them. Tim, he just left, but he'd be mad, but they beat him.
oh boy, Jeffrey, when he watches this replay, we're so going to get an earful about this.
That's funny. Up
But
next, we
Jeffrey,
got Vanderbilt dumpster fire at abysmal. Just absolute bad return of horrible Vanderbilt.
while you're at it, put Virginia in there with them. Let's go on and kill two birds with one stone. Vanderbilt and Virginia dumpster fires.
I'll give Virginia the best dumpster fire since they beat Carolina. But other than that, they didn't do much else. We'll give them the best dumpster fire team.
Virginia Tech bowl team. I think Wake almost. Oh,
Probably.
I'd put them right in there. Then you got Wake almost bowl team by definition, even though they did look like a dumpster fire at times.
Do you think they're above or below Purdue?
Well, they went 5-7. Purdue went 4-8. So technically, if we're going by records, they're ahead of Purdue.
Wake went 4-8 as well.
Oh, my bad. My bad.
Yeah, they went 4-8, 1-7 in the ACC. Yeah, I thought they went 5-7 as well, but then the more I thought about it, I'm like, they went 4-8.
My apologies. My apologies. It's hard to remember everything. Sorry. What do you think, Jeffrey? You think they were better than Purdue?
They beat Vanderbilt. They beat Pittsburgh. They beat Old Dominion and Elon. They lost close to Clemson. They lost close to Duke, and they lost close to Syracuse. I mean, you're going with, I don't know, you're going with the Big Ten West or the ACC. Both aren't all that great. I guess to Will's point, 1-7, AC had an easy schedule. I'll go with Purdue over Wake. Now, you also got Jason saying in chat, he said Rutgers beat Virginia Tech comfortably. So, I mean, we got Rutgers ahead of them. So we did that right. We got Rutgers ahead of Virginia Tech.
Yes. Will said Wake should be they were a dumpster fire. But here's the thing, though, Will. They 4-8. I mean, I guess that could be considered a dumpster fire to some people, but I just think that they did do just enough, I think, to keep themselves out. I think they're better than Virginia. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, Virginia, the only thing they've got is the North Carolina win. That makes them look better by default. But again, you're kind of using the transitive property and all this other stuff to prove. I don't know. It's close, but yeah, again, I get it. That's what I'm saying. The North Carolina win makes Virginia look better. I understand. I completely get it. And plus, they did hang with James Madison too. I mean, it is what it is. It's kind of like with Narduzzi. Dave Clawson's been there for a long time. He kind of has the benefit of the doubt. We'll I guess, be slightly nice to him. But yes. I totally get it. I can definitely see it going the other way.
Our next team is the Washington Huskies, CFP contender, and Jeffrey, they're right behind Michigan.
Yep, they're ahead of the Texas Longhorns. Sorry to Longhorns fans, but you lost to them, and it's. I think that they got to be there. They have to be the second team.
Yeah, and to continue on with your point, as we get down to our final three teams, I do believe, is they were a team that overperformed in a lot of people's eyes. This to them just making the playoffs was house money, even if they didn't beat Texas. To them, that's like, woohoo, party time. Penix is great. And then it's like, oh, they could win this whole thing. But I'm glad they didn't pick them as like a bowl team, because then that would have been worse than Missouri.
Yeah, I agree. I was high on Penix the whole time because obviously at Indiana going to Washington, I thought that they were going to do really well. So I had them being, higher than most people thought. No one thought they were going to be CFP for the most part, but them making it very impressive season, definitely got to be there for sure. And they overperformed what even I thought, which I had high expectations. So very good job for Washington. They did also what TCU did, got to win. And, for a team that hasn't been able to really do much like that, because Washington made playoff back with Jake Browning, and they weren't able to win against Alabama. That was very awesome for the Huskies. Jason saying move Wake, IU, and Pitt down. One of Pitt's 3 wins was Wolford. They almost didn't make a bowl. I mean, they didn't almost make a bowl, so I don't know. I mean, we're giving credit to Narduzzi and Clawson, but I mean, they were pretty bad. Indiana, to me, is better than Wake Forest, but still, because being in the Big Ten. But I mean, I get Jason's point, but I don't know.
I get his point as well. But if you look at Indiana, if you watched them, they were in almost every game they played except for the Michigan game.
Yeah,
they were even. Here's the thing. They were even in the Ohio State game. Yeah, the scoreboard says different. But if you watch that game, that was what, a 6-point game going to the fourth, or what, 10? It wasn't that big of a score difference. Indiana was just got exhausted because their offense had no clue what they were doing. And they almost beat my Louisville Cardinals too, which is another big key. If Tom Allen would have just called a QB sneak, then that would have solved the problem.
Yeah, literally. I mean, Indiana is better than people are giving them credit for. Like you said, a QB sneak away from possibly beating Louisville. They were in the Ohio State game. They hung with Penn State, and they were literally in like every single game. So, I mean, yeah, will Virginia's better than Wake and Pitt? I mean, they're not going to let us live this down here. I will say, if we move anybody, I'll move Wake and Pitt down, and we can move Virginia up. But I'm not moving Indiana. The proof is in the pudding. Indiana is better than those dumpster fire teams.
I mean,
Indiana's not moving.
Here's the thing,
I
Jeffrey.
understand, Jason, 2 of the wins was Indiana State and Akron, but they hung with all those good teams. They're not a dumpster fire.
Well, Jeffrey, let's finish these last 3 teams, and then we'll make revisions before we get out of here. Let's get these last 3. And then we'll let the chat make the argument. Washington State, I would put in almost bowl because they were unbeaten for the longest time in the top 25, but they collapsed towards the end.
Yeah, Washington State, I mean, they went 5-7, I believe. And yeah, 5-7, 2-7. They're definitely in almost bowl.
And they took their rival Washington to the brink of a loss.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they were very competitive in that game. I mean, they had some up and down performances. They had some ugly games as well. I'm gonna look at their schedule real quick because I know there was like one game that they had that was very bad. Like I can't remember which one it was. Like you said, trying to remember everybody's schedule and what they did. It's kind of tough sometimes, but they definitely were an up and down team because I know they got a big win. I think then they beat Oregon State. Or yeah, that's what it was. They beat Oregon State. They beat Wisconsin. People thought Wisconsin was decent. They lost to Stanford. That's it. That's the bad loss. That's what I was thinking of. They lost to Stanford, lost to Cal, which Cal made a bowl, lost to Arizona State too. That was a really bad loss. But they beat Colorado big time. They destroyed them, hung with Washington. So there was some good for Washington State, but they just weren't consistent.
And Jeffrey, apparently the chat is giving us a lot of flack now. Jason O says Maryland hung with Michigan, so top 5, right?
That's not what I mean. I'm just saying that Indiana, every single game that they played, they were in. And it's like these other teams got blitzed over and over and over. That's the argument to be made.
And here's the thing.
The Fire team does not hang with Louisville, Penn State, some of these other teams. That's just my opinion. I mean, if you guys really want to move them down, I'll move them down. But I don't. To me, they're just not a dumpster fire. They're not as bad as those other teams.
See, here's the thing. I get where he's coming from, but here's the thing, though. If you're saying they're a dumpster fire, they wouldn't have hung with all those teams, like Jeffrey said. I agree with him on that point. A dumpster fire team does not hang with all those great teams, and most of them were great teams this year. Now, the Akron, I get Will's bringing that up, but that was maybe a fluky game. Everyone's allowed to have
a fluky game, but here's the thing. There's 2 caveats with that game. Number one, Akron's quarterback in that game, I think, tore his ACL in the very next game. And if he doesn't tear his ACL, Akron's not going 2-10. They're having a better season. They might have made a bowl game with their quarterback. He was really good. He tore his ACL. Number 2, Indiana had Taven Jackson in at quarterback. They switched to Brendan Sorsby. So you could use that same logic and say, well, Arizona's not that good because they lost to Mississippi State, but they had Jane DeLore and they switched to Fafita. So Indiana hung with Penn State, hung with all those other teams when they had Brendan Sorsby. So I don't think they would have barely beat out. I get your point. I mean, Indiana's not a good team by any means. I'm not saying that. They were not good, but they're either in the bottom of the list or the second bottom of the list. And I think statistically, if you look at Indiana offensively and defensively, their offensive and defensive numbers were average. Like they were actually, I think, like 8th in the Big Ten on defense and like 9th or 10th in the Big Ten on offense. That's not dumpster fire. They just didn't win. They were close. They just didn't win. It is what it is.
Yeah, and me and Jeffrey, when we define dumpster fire, it's no redeeming qualities. Like all these teams we have at the bottom, except for Virginia, have no redeeming qualities. Indiana has plenty of them. Because if they don't make stupid play calling decisions against Penn State, we would be looking at Penn State a little bit different.
Tom Allen got fired.
Look, goal line sneak. If Indiana just sneaks it in, we would be looking at them different. We would be looking at Louisville different. Would Louisville beat Notre Dame? We don't know. It's a domino effect. We're giving Indiana credit for that bad play call.
Imagine how people will be treating Washington right now if they lost to Washington State, if they didn't win one of those Oregon games, if they had blown it against Arizona State that they barely beat. I mean, they barely won all those games, but Washington's legit and they're fantastic because they won, but they barely won. So it's like the other effect where it's like, are they that good? Because they barely won all those games, just like is Indiana that bad because they barely, it's tough. It's argumentatively, it's tough sometimes because you're basing it off of what they did. I agree Pitt and Wake are awful, but the coaches are longtime coaches. I get their argument there. Wake and Pitt, it's not a lot there. Pitt beat Louisville. That's there, but Wake didn't really beat anybody, so I get it. But they did win 4 games. It's tough.
So let's finish these last 2 teams, and then we'll make revisions, and it'll be our final product, and it's the seal of a stamp of approval, no changing. West Virginia, they're a bowl team, but are they top 25? Are we ready to grant them that? Has Neil Brown earned that yet?
This is tough because of the fact West Virginia finished 9-4, and 9-4 usually is enough to be ranked. Like you've got Kansas State at 9-4, and they're ranked. Kansas is 9-4, and they're ranked. But West Virginia is not ranked. They do not have them ranked in the final AP poll. But there's a lot of good with the Mountaineers. I mean, they actually had a decent season. I mean, especially compared to what a lot of people were expecting from Neil Brown. Like, are they going to even go 7-6 or 7-5, whatever? They did good, but when you look at their resume, they beat Duquesne, they beat Pitt, who was not good. They beat Texas Tech, who barely made a bowl game. They beat TCU, who didn't make a bowl game. They beat UCF, who barely did. They beat BYU, who did not. They beat Cincinnati, who did not. And they beat Baylor, who did not. Literally, like, I guess West Virginia's best win probably is North Carolina. Like, there's not a lot there. And they lost to Penn State big. They lost to Oklahoma State fairly comfortably. They got blown out against Oklahoma. And they lost to Houston, who was bad. I mean, it's argumentative. It's close, but they don't really have a good win, man. Like, their best win's North Carolina. So I think they felt just short of the top 25.
Well, in this case, Jeffrey, do we put them ahead of Carolina? Because Carolina were fighting for top 25. And obviously we're not going to have enough, so we're going to have to move some teams up. So does West Virginia move into that spot?
For now, I'll put them ahead of UCLA. I'll put them behind NC State and Kansas, but at 9-4 right there. They're definitely out of North Carolina because they beat them, even though Carolina had all the opt-outs. Right now, we've got 6, 11. Wait a minute. 22, I think? 21. I think we've only got 21 teams in the top 25. That's not good.
So, Jeffrey, obviously, unless we're going to put Wisconsin there, Wisconsin is our last and final team, and then we will figure out where we could slide some teams in and see if we need to move anybody, and then that'll be our final product. And then we'll stamp of approval. Is Wisconsin anywhere close? Or we just go put them in?
Wisconsin finished 7-6, so definitely not. They're 7-6, and they went 5-4 in the Big Ten. Decent season for the Badgers, but not anything super special. I guess, I mean, somewhere in here, probably, I guess, about right there.
Okay, so we have currently 21 teams, and we need 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18. Yeah, we have 21 teams. Okay.
We need 4 more in the top 25. Well, I know for one thing, Kansas is going in the top 25, and so is NC State. That's easy.
Okay, Jeffrey. Then can Duke go in then? Did I present an argument that we could put Duke in?
It's tough because, again, they were so good, and then he got injured, and then they collapsed. But there's an argument for sure.
But then we can't put Kansas in. I know they finished ranked, but if you're going to use the injury argument, we got to try to treat them as same. Because I'm really fighting for Duke right now, Jeffrey. I get the Riley Leonard injury, but you can't deny what they did. They beat Clemson, who's in the top 25. I mean, I get Kansas beat Oklahoma. I mean, I guess it comes down to how much do you value that Clemson win over the Oklahoma win.
Yeah, Jace is saying Kansas State should move up. We already got him in the top 25. I mean, Tennessee finished above them in the poll. I think Iowa did. Clemson did. So, I mean, I think there's a decent spot. I mean, they're better than Iowa probably, but they didn't finish higher than them. But that's definitely getting, very picky and argumentative there. I mean, this is what a tier list is for. I mean, we're arguing these teams to the hilt. I don't blame you. Like Will said, SMU and Liberty are in the AP poll. Oregon State and West Virginia received the 26th and 27th votes. That makes a little bit of a difference, though, because we're talking about that's why we don't have enough teams. We've got every single team ranked in the top 25 that's currently in there. We just added Kansas and NC State, but SMU and Liberty are ranked. So West Virginia and UCLA and, USC, Oregon State, UNC, Duke, they're probably the teams that have an argument. Since SMU and Liberty are ranked, we can't put them there since we don't have them on the tier list. But since Will's saying Oregon State and West Virginia, do you want to go with those two teams? I mean, if Tim was still here, he'd be arguing USC now. He'd be saying USC.
So here's the thing, Jeffrey. Is there anything I could do to convince you about Duke? I'm feeling really strongly that Duke deserves a lot of credit for what they did, even not being healthy, because Kansas was not healthy either, but we're still giving them the benefit of the doubt. I'm standing on this Duke. I'm standing on Duke, Jeffrey. I really want Duke in here. I think they've earned it.
I'll give Neil Brown credit because they finished 9-4. We'll give Neil Brown the credit, and they have the 27th most votes. But now we're down to all the teams that are no longer non-win teams, because West Virginia is the last non-win team there, I believe. And the rest of these teams, UCLA, 8-5. USC 8-5, Oregon State 8-5, UNC 8-5, Duke 8-5, Northwestern 8-5, Utah 8-5. So it's down to these teams. I agree. Like Jason said, maybe West Virginia due to record. I agree. So West Virginia, Neil Brown's in. We got one 8-5 team. Do we go with Will? Oregon State because they had 26 most in the votes, or do we go with Duke? It's probably Duke or Oregon State, or maybe USC. One of those.
Here's the thing, Jeffrey. Which way are you leaning? Are you leaning more towards with Duke, or are you leaning towards Oregon State?
I don't know. It's so close because Jason says either Oregon State or Northwestern, so he's not arguing Duke at all. I don't know what Will thinks. Will's still here. I don't know. He might go with Duke because of ACC. With Notre Dame having the allegiance there with the ACC. I don't know, though. I mean, the thing is you got to give credit to Duke because Riley Leonard. Oregon State, I mean, they were a good team. this season. But unfortunately, losing DJ in the bowl game, like if they had all those guys, that game might have been better against Notre Dame. USC, I mean, I know they beat Louisville in the bowl game, but I mean, that UCLA loss was very disappointing, and they had some bad moments, like barely beating Cal. And I don't know. And then like A&M, I mean, A&M's 7-6, but like a lot of talent, but just not enough there. Carolina, you got Drake May. They finished 8-5, but they lost the bowl game. I mean, I will give Duke the argument that they won their bowl game and Oregon State lost, but Duke played Troy, who had a stomach bug, and Oregon State, they played Notre Dame. And, I mean, like, it's just hard. I don't know. It's tight. The chat's not helping us out here. No one's saying anything other than Jay saying either Oregon State or Northwestern.
I will say this, Jeffrey. I have no problem with you putting West Virginia in because they are in by record. It comes down to either Oregon State or Duke, like you said. Here's the thing.
Will said Duke. I told you he was going to go Duke because of the Notre Dame and the ACC. I told you. I knew it. Will's going Duke. Jason's going Oregon State. I kind of am leaning more Oregon State because I feel like they were better throughout the year. But Duke, Riley Leonard was good. I mean, but it's close. It's very close.
Here's the thing, though, Jeffrey, and it's like, who did Oregon State beat? At least Duke can make mention that they beat Clemson. Who does Oregon State have on their resume that they could say, "Look at our landmark win"?
I mean, that's a good point. I'm pulling up Oregon State's schedule again to look at it. I mean, they beat UCLA when they were ranked, but UCLA fell out. I mean, they beat Utah back when Utah was ranked again, but they fell out. They beat Cal that made a bowl. They beat Stanford, Colorado, who weren't good. They got blitzed by Oregon. They were competitive with Washington in the rain. They almost won. They almost beat Arizona, and they almost beat Washington State, but Washington State didn't make a bowl. Man, it's close.
Yeah, Jeffrey,
Man, this is tough. Why does it come down to this? I mean, you're going Duke. I'm like kind of Oregon State. I don't know. It's close. It is so close. Duke's got the better win. I'll give you that. They do.
Jeffrey, it's just like if this was preseason, this would be a little more easier because it's like preseason, kind of going off what we've seen. Oregon State would have had it in the preseason, but now that we know what these teams are, it makes it a little more harder. I mean, Jeffrey, we could just split in the middle and just put Texas A&M in just because they're the SEC if we want. I mean,
oh yeah, that would create an uproar. It'd be like, "What are you doing? It was a good tier list until now. What are you doing?" Even though there's been some disagreements about Indiana and a few other teams, we're still not done completely yet. I mean, I guess I'll go Duke. I guess. I mean, I feel like Oregon State was the better team, but Riley Leonard, I mean, they were pretty good when he was in. They kind of fell apart a bit without him. They won the bowl game. I think Oregon State was better. I do. I really do. But I'll go Duke. I'll give you Duke.
Score one for me. Jeffrey finally gave me one.
Hey, I gave you Louisville too, right at the top of that top 25. It's looking good. But I mean, see, Jason says if you put A&M in, I'll take to the streets. Told you. I mean, it's gonna be an uproar. We're not doing A&M. Don't worry, Jason. We're not going A&M.
No, Jason, we're not doing A&M. We're not going to be ESPN. I promise.
So I think we're about done. We've got a pretty good looking tier list here, I think. No arguments with the CFP contenders, I don't think, with anybody. We've got Michigan, Washington, Texas, Alabama, Florida State, and Georgia. No one else is there. That's who we've got for the CFP contenders.
Okay, Jeffrey. So do Florida State and Georgia count for the NY6? Because if not, we still need two more teams for NY6.
Well, I mean, I think we put Florida State and Georgia in the CFP because of they contended for it and they were right there, especially like Florida State being undefeated. I know that they made the NY6. And I know like we have Florida State ahead of Georgia, but that doesn't even count. Like I know Georgia beat them like that, but man, I mean, Florida State didn't have a team and they were undefeated the entire way. So that's why I had them there, just to give them some credit. I don't know. I mean, they were in the NY6, but they contended for the CFP.
That's fair. That's fair. I mean, this is our tier list, so we got to be happy with it at the end of the day. We got to look back at this. If we do another one in the preseason, it'd be like, have we changed our minds any?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and then the NY6, we put all the teams that made it. Obviously, Oregon, Ole Miss, Missouri, Ohio State, and Penn State. No arguments there. Top 25, we got Louisville, LSU, Notre Dame, Arizona, Oklahoma State, Oklahoma, Clemson, Tennessee, Iowa, Kansas State, Kansas, NC State, West Virginia, and Duke. We squeaked Duke in there. Gave Duke a spot in the top 25 because of Riley Leonard's injury. They were really good before that, so we got them there.
And then for our bowl teams, we have UCLA, USC, Oregon State, North Carolina, Texas A&M, Northwestern, Utah, Kentucky, Texas Tech, Iowa State, Wisconsin, Maryland, Rutgers, Virginia Tech, Auburn, Boston College, Cal, UCF, Georgia Tech, Miami, Syracuse were all bowl teams, and Minnesota. Now, Minnesota shouldn't really count because they got it on smarts, technicality. I will keep saying that because that was a robbery, but anywho, life goes on. And then almost bowl teams were Florida, South Carolina, Washington State, TCU, Nebraska, Arkansas, BYU, Illinois, Mississippi State, Colorado, Purdue, Wake Forest, Indiana, Pitt, and then dumpster fire / trash was Virginia, Houston, Michigan State, Stanford, Arizona State, Baylor, Cincinnati, and Vanderbilt. That is our tier list. Now, Jeffrey, are we gonna correct? Are we gonna move Wake Forest down at least? Because the chat did give us an uproar about that. Are we?
Merlin D says, "Can you put Washington State ahead of Florida?" I mean, Florida beat Tennessee. I mean, Washington State did beat Oregon State, but Florida beat Tennessee.
Yeah. This is one again. Jeffrey, we could do this all night.
I know. It's like it's a technicality. I mean, we've got Florida, South Carolina, Washington State all there. Like, they're close to a bowl. They all went 5-7. They were all decent at times. You know, Washington State and Florida got a good win. South Carolina even, beat Kentucky. Like, it wasn't all bad, but they, it's close. I mean, Florida's more talented than Washington State.
Yeah, they are, but it's like, I mean, Florida's got that great win over Tennessee.
I think better win. Even though people think Tennessee stinks, it's a better win.
I will say this, Jeffrey, before we close it out. Pitt, and I know people, the bottom three, Wake, Pitt, and Indiana, that they kept bugging us about that. Do you want to move one of them down to make them happy? I even know this is our tier list, but we let our audience in on it. Yeah, move Wake down at least. I guess Wake, but Pitt, Indiana stay. No.
We'll put Virginia in there. We'll give Virginia because they beat North Carolina. And since Wake didn't really beat anybody, they belong in the dumpster fire. But Pitt, they got the win over Louisville. Virginia got the win over North Carolina. And Indiana, the most competitive team this season that didn't really beat anybody. I mean, they were, just like Nebraska a couple years, the best 3-9 team. So I think Indiana sticks in almost bowl. It's close. I get the argument why they shouldn't be, but we got them there. So that's the tier list. I think we're good.
Yeah, I think we're good too, Jeffrey. I had a lot of fun doing this tonight. This was a fun look back. If I had to grade this final tier list, since we did it in our preseason one, I would say we did a B+. I would like to say we did an A+ job, but there was so many arguments you could have made for a lot of teams. I'll say B+ is a grade. What about you?
I mean, I'll give it it's a cross between an A- or a B+. I mean, we corrected a lot of the errors and put the teams in the right spots. I mean, like the bowl teams, it's easy. We did all the teams that made bowls, even though Minnesota shouldn't have, but we know why. Technicality, but we got all of them right easy because they all made bowls. We got enough teams to fit the top 25, and since we didn't have SMU and Liberty because of the fact that, that's just the way it is. They're not in because they're not on the tier list. We put West Virginia in there. We put Duke in there to make up for it. I think that was pretty solid. I think we did pretty good with the CFP. I know the bottom people are complaining, but Jay said if you combine Indiana Pitt's wins, they make the humanitarian bowl. I guess that's what almost means. That's hilarious. I love it, Jason. I appreciate your comments. You've been hilarious tonight. I love it. But, I mean, it is funny, though. I mean, they're not good teams by no means, but you got to give them some credit. Indiana, Pitt, Virginia have more than what those bottom teams have, I guess you could say. But none of them are that good. But I'm with you. I think A- B+ for what we did.
Jeffrey, if there's one thing that when people go back and watch this, they're going to be like, Indiana should be in dumpster fire. I don't care that they almost lost or Pitt. That's going to be like the biggest outrage. They're not going to care that we blundered on Missouri or we blundered on some other teams. They're going to care about those two teams. And why is Virginia an almost bowl? Well, it's because our chat was over here telling us that we're being too nice.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. It's definitely hilarious. Jason, good show, guys. See you next time. Appreciate that, Jason. We'll definitely be doing more streams and videos in the future. Appreciate that a lot. It was a lot of fun doing the tier list. It was definitely amazing. It was as fun as I thought it was going to be. I knew it was going to be a blast, and it was. Appreciate you coming up with the idea, Austin, for us to review what we did in the preseason. And I think we did a pretty good job fixing the mistakes. And overall, I don't even think we did too bad ranking the teams in the first place. Had some errors, but everybody does. Good stuff, gentlemen. So, Will, appreciate you for sticking it out, Will, as well. The entire show was a lot of fun. Do you have any final thoughts, Austin?
Yeah, thank you for everybody being here. I really enjoyed doing this with Jeffrey. And, I thought, since we did in the preseason, we just needed to correct our mistakes and do what's right because – when you do preseason lists, you kind of have to come back and correct what you got wrong. That way, it doesn't look completely bad. But it was a lot of fun. I enjoy doing streams with Jeffrey and Will and Jackson when we all get the chance. But this was really fun. Looking forward to doing this again sometime soon. And we'll argue about whether Indiana should make a bowl next year or maybe we'll put them in top 25. Maybe Kurt Sinetti will have them beat Michigan and Ohio State. Who knows? But overall, this was fun. Please make sure you like, comment, subscribe, click on the notification bells, no matter where you're watching, whether you're on Sports Talk with Austin or Jeffrey from Only Talk Sports. Links for Jeffrey's channel will be down in the description of mine after this uploads. But that's where you can find us both. Jeffrey, got any exciting stuff coming up that you want to let the people in on?
Oh, definitely. I got more videos coming out, more with college basketball now that's really in the forefront, and the NFL going to continue to be covering the playoffs. But college football is dying off. But if there's some big news, definitely we'll continue to cover it. But definitely a lot more content coming up in the future, and definitely can't wait to make those type of videos. It's going to be a lot of fun with basketball and the NFL. And, like Austin said, subscribe if you're new and like the stream as well. Appreciate everybody for being here. You guys are awesome.
You guys are awesome as well. And remember, everybody, just remember, life hits you fast. So enjoy it.
Thanks for being here, everybody.